the Industrial Revolution of the Mage Lord. Hello again, dear adventurers of the multiverse. Thanks for joining us once more on this epic journey. Remember, this story is pure science fiction from our wild imagination. So don't go trying to summon dragons in your backyard. The rights of this amazing novel belong entirely to its original author. We are only the narrators. Do you want more adventures? Show some love to our YouTube channel with a subscription and a like. And if you want exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting for you with open arms. Chapter 401 New Order. Duke Ralph's residence was far more luxurious and spacious than Harvey's own castle. The furnishings of his private study and living room alone were a testament to this. Carved oak bookcases filled 2 entire walls, and the wooden furniture was meticulously inlaid with gilded edges. The place was overflowing with a vast collection of books, a collection comparable to a research-focused spellcaster's tower. Perhaps genuinely shaken by the assassination attempt, all the outward-facing windows in the Duke's residence were barred shut with wooden bars and covered with thick velvet curtains. Natural light was completely blocked from the interior during the day, casting a gloomy, dark atmosphere over the vast castle. Harvey disliked this environment. His smaller study, with its large floor-to-ceiling windows, abundant light, and constant warmth from the heater, was more to his liking. Suddenly, a guard's whispered questioning voice echoed from outside the room, followed by a gentle knock on the door. "Come in." Harvey put down the book he was casually flipping through and looked up to see the army commander, Pierce, pushing open the door. "Sir, the interrogation of the captured nobles is complete." Pierce bowed slightly and placed a sheaf of white paper in front of Harvey. "Is this the complete list? Are these the only nobles left in Duke Ralph's fiefdom?" Harvey asked, puzzled, as he carefully read the list. "Yes," Pierce answered affirmatively. "The Ralph family has always been cautious in the enfeoffment of vassal nobles. There are a total of 136 small nobles and knights under the jurisdiction of the territory. Excluding the diehards who died in our military operations, there are 70 people who surrendered voluntarily or were forced to be captured because of ignorance. Most of them are knight landlords and declining small nobles who are far away from Fingigan City." Harvey nodded and turned to the first page of the list. He found that the people listed in the first few rows were the direct descendants of Duke Ralph's family. In addition to the 5th Duchess, there were also the Duke's 3 young children. When Duke Ralph fled, he only took his eldest son and 2 legitimate nephews with him, and abandoned the rest of the family. In addition, the only Ralph family member with the highest status who was captured alive in the entire Fingigan City was the Duke's younger brother, Baron Simone. According to the blood warriors responsible for capturing them, the Baron led his family members out of the city through a secret passage, carrying several boxes of gold. As soon as he emerged, he was caught by the Northern Army Special Forces team who had been waiting at the exit of the secret passage. He was very tough and drew his sword, intending to break through at all costs, but then he had his leg broken by a bullet. Harvey quickly reviewed the entire list, tapping the table with satisfaction. "Well done. How are the people in the city responding?" Pierce looked puzzled, and after a moment's hesitation, he said, "Sir, while we've done our best to communicate our position to the people and encourage them to report the crimes of these nobles, the idea of commoners accusing nobles is completely unheard of for the locals. They've never even dared to think about it." Harvey had anticipated this. No matter how fierce the wars and invasions between the nobles, for the common people, it was simply a change of lords to continue exploiting and oppressing them. To anger a noble and be killed at will was simply bad luck, while to rebel beyond all reason would only result in a tragic fate, either hanging or hanging from the city gates. Tied to the land, the people could only focus on the harvest. Simply surviving was a struggle. Since the people are afraid to report the nobles' crimes, let them confess on their own initiative. Harvey looked up at Pierce and said calmly, "You're a master at interrogation, anyway. I'm sure you'll quickly render a fair verdict." Pierce immediately understood his implication. His lips curled slightly, and after a salute, he hurried away. In reality, guilt or innocence is just a facade. For these exploiters who have exploited the people for generations, Harvey felt certain that if he executed every other person, there would be some who slipped through the net. It was impossible for them to be wrongly accused. Not long after Pierce left, 088, the secret police officer in charge of Fingigan City's intelligence operations, came to see Harvey. "My lord, what do you plan to do with these captured nobles?" "Why?" Harvey raised his eyebrows and asked curiously, "Are there any people among them who have been bribed by you?" 088 nodded, bowed and slowly explained, "Baron Frost Eagle's second son, Sir Ross, has always been our target of winning over and instigating rebellion. Harvey couldn't help laughing. That stubborn Baron Frost Eagle? I heard that when the Fingidling Mountain Fort was captured, he saw that he was defeated and even planned to commit suicide to avoid being captured and humiliated. In the end, he was knocked unconscious by his son and bodyguards on the spot and dragged to surrender. Right, he found the page of the Frost Eagle family from the list of nobles on the table in front of him, checked it, picked up the pen and crossed out the young man named Ross. You've been in Fingidling City for less than half a year, and you've actually succeeded in inciting a noble to rebel. It seems that Asdalan's training of you has been very effective, 088 said modestly. Thank you for the compliment, sir. The main reason is that this young man has a kind heart, which is rare. He adheres to the chivalric creed, but acts without being rigid. In addition, he is not of noble birth. His biological mother was a commoner maid, and she has always sympathized with ordinary people. Harvey nodded and ordered, then wait a while. Bring him to see me after the public trial of the nobles is over. After speaking, he stood up and walked to the bookcase, casually pulled out a biography of the Ralph family and began to read. In addition, arrange for your people to begin announcing to the public in the city as soon as possible. At the latest, in a week, I will publicly try all nobles in the clock tower square in the inner city. Those guilty of serious crimes will be sentenced to death by hanging in public, and accomplices will be sent to the north for imprisonment or hard labor. Just execute them directly. 088 looked a little surprised. I was thinking, if the reputation of the mass execution of nobles spreads to other parts of the country, will it cause, as expected of a guy like Asdalan who was born into an ancient wizard family, the intelligence personnel he trained personally, their thinking and ideas completely put aside class emotions. And they are more concerned about political influence and weighing gains and losses. Harvey shook his head with a smile, and found that the subordinates he trained were better at political struggles than himself. He sighed, looking at the young man of similar age standing before him. He gently instructed, "This is the inevitable outcome. Under my rule, there will be no more hereditary nobles with real power. Those titles will ultimately become mere empty honors, representing personal and family honor. Once the people have tasted the sweetness of not being oppressed, they will naturally become our greatest supporters. As for the hereditary nobles, having lost their fiefdoms and power under Harvey's military oppression, they must submit to him and follow his decrees and policies to secure legitimate benefits for their families if they wish to survive and continue to live a comfortable life. Of course, Harvey's powerful military force will also serve as their backing. Once they've tasted the sweetness of magic technology as the primary productive force, they likely won't want to return to their current state of ignorance and decay. After all, the fiefdoms of most of the lower-class nobles are not considered wealthy, and even face bankruptcy if they fail to manage their property properly. And yet, this group of people is the largest among the aristocracy. I believe they will soon realize that by clinging to Harvey's thigh, they can easily live a comfortable life that they could never have imagined before. Chapter 402 Public Trial. 3 days later, Harvey convened a public trial in Fingidling City's Bell Tower Square as scheduled. To explain to the people the unprovoked war they had endured, Harvey had preemptively arranged for the city's municipal administrators, who had arrived from the northern border to take over, to publicly announce the unprovoked invasion of a neighboring lord by Duke Ralph and his family. He also ordered the secret police to spread the news throughout the city, ensuring that the border lord, now occupying Fingidling City, had legitimately taken over the city under the guise of self-defense. The bell rang at noon, but fewer people than expected gathered. Although Fingidling City boasted a much warmer climate than the northern border, the still untouched spring chill and the generally light clothing of the locals discouraged large numbers of people from attending the meeting. However, as long as people showed up, it would be enough. Harvey believed that over time, word of mouth would be more effective than his door-to-door propaganda. People of Fingidling City, good afternoon. Harvey climbed onto the temporary platform and looked around at the people below. I am Harvey Floyd, Lord of the North. Most of you probably haven't heard of my name. A secret policeman disguised as an ordinary citizen suddenly shouted, I know you, respected Lord. You are the Lord who took in and treated infected refugees in the border areas when the plague was spreading in the royal capital. As soon as these words came out, many people who had personally experienced the terrible plague began to discuss in a low voice. The plague potion that was secretly sold in the underground black market in Fingidling City was rumored to be the work of this lord. Duke Ralph didn't care about our lives, but the neighboring lords sent the medicine to the city. Hey, and the price was very low, Almost everyone can afford it. The secret sale of plague potions to the surrounding areas was mainly to prevent the spread of the plague, and at the same time to get a lot of export income, but now it is just right to package it as caring for the people. Harvey waved his hand and continued, "First, I apologize and express my condolences to the innocent people who suffered personal and property damage during this turmoil with Duke Ralph. This was a conspiracy orchestrated by the capital of Golden Glory City. Grand Oak St. Valen, in order to cling to the church's influence, insisted on intervening in the conflict with the Union's spellcasters. To this end, he instructed Duke Ralph to repeatedly provoke me. He not only seized my caravans, plundered my subjects, but also sent troops to invade my territory. Finally, I could no longer tolerate this and decided to lead my army in a counterattack." Harvey didn't intend to elaborate on the truth of this matter. The general public preferred the gossip and rumors they heard privately to his own serious public speeches, and the channels for disseminating such information were precisely the propaganda channels that the secret police excelled in. Harvey quickly shifted the topic to the main event, the trial of the nobles' crimes. During this war and turmoil, the nobles I captured have all been privately interrogated and have confessed to some of their outrageous crimes. This includes not only their disputes with me, but also the serious crimes they committed against innocent people in Invade City. As soon as he finished speaking, the atmosphere in the audience became noticeably more heated. While they didn't dare to openly accuse the nobles, watching the once high and mighty nobles being tried and executed was probably something the lower classes of this world enjoyed the most. Harvey handed this section directly to Commander Pierce and the relevant personnel sent by the Frontier Territory Police Department, then took a seat on the side of the podium to spectate. The outcome of the interrogation had already been finalized. Duke Ralph's die-hard followers were dragged onto the platform one by one, lined up, and knelt before the crowd. Behind them stood stern-faced Northern Army soldiers. Pierce, standing over an alchemical megaphone, loudly proclaimed their crimes, from unprovoked invasions of neighboring lords, to allowing soldiers to plunder civilians, to extortion and oppression of the people, a textbook example of the oppression and cruelty of the common people by the nobility of that era. Under Pierce's masterful interrogation skills, even some nobles, unable to bear the torture, confessed in detail their abductions of women and injuries to their families, their maliciously undercutting the prices of fine furs from the people, and the persistent non-payment of IOUs to a certain store. As the soldiers, with steady volleys of musketry, executed the first batch of serious nobles in the square, the people finally believed that the foreign lord on the platform truly intended to judge and punish the nobles, and to bring them justice. I want to expose Baron Lewis' crimes. He repeatedly raised the territory's labor tax during the spring plowing season this year. We were forced to sell our wheat seed reserves to pay the taxes, and in the end, we couldn't even plant our fields. I want to accuse him too. Sir Andrew, yes. He's Duke Ralph's lieutenant captain of the guard. To expand his mansion in Invade City, he's unjustly encroached on the homes of the surrounding people and demolished our shelters, without offering a penny of compensation. I want to accuse him too. Under deliberate guidance, more and more people began to muster the courage to stand up and accuse the nobles. Of the 70 or so people who were ultimately put on trial, more than a dozen nobles from the Duke's direct line, whose crimes were more serious, were sentenced to death and executed publicly. The lesser nobles, who had been resolutely exposed by the public, were imprisoned according to the severity of their crimes, awaiting transfer back to the Northern Frontier Territory, where the mines and forests desperately needed this high-quality, free labor. The stick was done, and it was time for the carrot. Harvey returned to his position beside the loudspeaker on the platform and cleared his throat, ignoring the bloody execution scene below. I know that during this conflict, there was much unrest in Invade City. Some thugs took advantage of the situation to loot, burning dozens of houses. Of course, my troops also blew up many homes during the fighting. The conflict also resulted in the deaths of over 30 civilians. His voice dropped to a low note, and he bowed slightly to the audience. As a border lord, I apologize to the people of Invade City. The harm caused by the war is beyond my control, and I feel deeply guilty. Harvey's words stirred another commotion among the crowd. No one had ever witnessed a noble lord bowing and apologizing to the people. In this purely feudal country with its clear hierarchies, such a scene was unheard of. Many people were shocked and stunned. But Harvey's next words were beyond their wildest dreams. No matter what, the injuries and losses you have suffered must be duly compensated. Harvey took a notice from the guards behind him and read it out personally. The families of those innocently killed in the war will receive a one-time compensation of 15 gold pounds. Those whose homes were damaged will have their money repaired free of charge within 3 months. Of course, they can also choose to cash it in and purchase a new property. As for those whose property was damaged or accidentally injured, the soon-to-be-established Fingigan City Hall would naturally be responsible for verifying compensation and providing free medical treatment. Soon, soldiers carried heavy wooden boxes filled with coins onto the stage and began distributing pensions and compensation according to the list of names to be compensated. Seeing that this border lord was actually going to hand out money on the spot, and that this was no empty promise, the atmosphere immediately heated up. Cheers rose in volume, and more people followed suit, crowding the square. Secret Police Officer 088, standing behind Harvey, whispered, "Sir, why don't you relocate the people of Fingigan City back to northern border? We're sorely lacking fresh labor." Harvey chuckled and shook his head without replying. Fingigan City had a population of over 10,000, and he hadn't considered relocating the local population. The terrain was flat and located in the center of the principality. If managed properly, it could become a high-quality granary capable of producing large quantities of food. If the alien enemies from the north really did invade the wasteland, it might even become Harvey's strategic rear base. Chapter 403, Coercion and Inducement. After the bloody and brutal public trial, Harvey held a banquet before his return to the north to appease the fears of the remaining surrendered nobles. The dinner was still Harvey's favorite buffet, though somewhat unconventional due to Fingigan City's winter scarcity and the country's backward culinary methods. Fortunately, the nobles present were not particularly interested in eating. Most of them gathered around Harvey and his group of high-ranking northern officials, looking apprehensive. The nobles present were small-time figures with no troops or soldiers under their command, having had no conflict with the northern army during the Battle of Fingigan City. After a few glasses of wine, even the lower-ranking northern army officers, who had always been stern with the southern nobles, softened their expressions. Harvey held a glass of wine, but he didn't drink a drop. Everyone present knew he was in the unique position of controlling an Avidar puppet. Unaware of this, no local noble dared force a drink on this de facto border king. Haha, I originally thought that completely banning the church's faith in Fingigan City and its surrounding areas would be met with strong opposition, but I didn't expect it to go so smoothly. Several of the lesser nobles surrounding Harvey shuddered, glancing at each other before cautiously answering, "My lord, Fingigan City and the surrounding area aren't a devout parish of the church. Yet, the tax on believers is so high every year, and everyone has long been deeply dissatisfied with the church." This was true. After all, when the Church of Light exploited its believers for profit, it wasn't just the commoners who were being fleeced. For them, the nobles and wealthy merchants were the fattest sheep, and they always adhered to the principle of the fatter the purse, the greater the obligation to serve the Lord. While the great nobles might still reap some benefits from close cooperation with the church, the lesser nobles were simply being plundered and exploited. After all, their fiefdoms were not wealthy, and their subjects all paid taxes to the church, leaving them with less money. Given this situation, Harvey naturally singled them out as prime targets for wooing. He clapped his hands and ordered his personal guards to bring a wooden tray covered in red silk. Atop it, a custom-made magic revolver gleamed. Compared to the standard military models, it featured noticeable handcrafted decorations and carvings, imbued with a mysterious beauty. "Sir, what does this mean?" The lesser nobles looked horrified. They knew full well that this weapon, like the spear slung across the soldiers' backs, had been the catalyst for the crushing of the Ralph family in Fingigan City. "I believe many of you have seen it before," Harvey chuckled and explained lightly. "This revolver is a mass-produced magic weapon manufactured in my territory." He raised his hand to signal everyone to gather around, picked up the revolver and handed it to a small noble. "What do you think of the difficulty of making and casting technology of this weapon?" The noble who had the gun forced into his hand froze, and he didn't know whether to put down the heavy revolver in his hand or hold it. My lord, forgive me for being blunt, but ordinary weapon craftsmen are probably not able to create such exquisite magic weapons. It must be the work of an alchemist with extraordinary power." Harvey laughed when he heard this. "You are totally wrong. To be honest with you, for such a short revolver, my military factory can mass-produce 1,000 of them every month. It only takes 1.5 months to equip an army that can capture Fingigan City." Pierce, who had been standing beside Harvey, came forward at the right time and added coldly, "At the same time, The military factory can also produce more than twice the number of automatic rifles, the type that soldiers carry on their backs. No, you are worthy of being the lord? You own such a powerful and prosperous northern territory. Ha, ha ha ha, ha ha ha. The nobles smiled flatteringly and echoed tremblingly. Only one young noble, a bandage still bound around his forehead, took the revolver. He examined it with a mixture of curiosity and astonishment, then summoned the courage to ask Harvey, "Lord, may I ask how you managed to enable mortal soldiers to wield magical weapons?" A nearby noble, clearly acquainted with him, tugged at his robe, cautioning him against the rudeness of publicly probing a great lord's military secrets. Harvey, unfazed, grinned. "What's your name?" "Ross Ralph, a knight of House Frostlock, my lord." The young man seemed unfazed by Harvey's revelation that he was a member of Duke Ralph's branch of the family, his expression remarkably calm. It turned out to be the man who had knocked his father unconscious and surrendered, a man of discerning tact. Harvey nodded and hinted, "The answer is simple. Just follow me back to the northern frontier and we'll find out the secret." Before he finished speaking, Ross's eyes lit up, and without a second's hesitation, he touched his chest and saluted. "It's my honor, my lord." The other nobles looked at Ross as if he were a fool, not understanding why he was manipulating people into walking into Tiger's mouth. After all, they were the losers in reality. Being able to save their lives and territorial property was already a kindness from the other side, but abandoning their family business and going to the other side's territory alone was really stupid. "Do you think my northern territory is some kind of dangerous and wild place?" Harvey found it a little funny, and said with a teasing expression, "You have never been to the wilderness, so it's normal that you don't know how prosperous and wealthy it is right now." He paused, and continued casually, "In fact, the fiscal tax and trade income of my territory this winter has reached as much as 100,000 gold pounds. Well, if it weren't for the large number of war refugees from the south, which consumed a lot of food reserves, the actual income would probably increase by about 30,000 pounds. The small nobles all took a breath of cold air. Winter, 3 months, 100,000 gold pounds. Most nobles rely on the rent of fiefdoms and the poll tax of their subjects all year round, and their income is at most 100 gold pounds. Some smarter ones may be able to double their income by running family businesses, but they always have to take more risks. The family wealth accumulated by many small nobles for generations is not even a fraction of Harvey's territory's annual fiscal revenue. Some people even keenly caught Harvey's words. Accommodating refugees from the south has consumed a significant portion of our reserves, approximately 30,000 gold pounds. It was unheard of for a noble lord to willingly dig into his own pocket to aid those refugees whose lives were as worthless as grass. A noble, his mind dazzled by the gold, cautiously approached Harvey and said flatteringly, "My lord, besides collecting taxes and rents, what kind of business could generate such an astronomical fortune?" Harvey glanced at the eager faces of the nobles and chuckled. "Want to know? It's simple. Give up your status and title as a feudal noble and adhere to the new system I've established, and you'll naturally get your share of this enormous pie." Chapter 404, City Building. After departing Fingigan City aboard the ironclad ship, Harvey temporarily severed his deep connection with his soul puppet. He then immediately summoned Asdalin and Reiner, who had been waiting in the castle, and began to discuss the crucial matters of building a city in the north. Fingigan City is now under our control. The entire northern part of the Principality of St. Valen will finally no longer be a stumbling block to our development. Harvey excitedly walked over to the map on the wall and, with a thick charcoal pencil, circled Pioneer Territory, Grizzly Territory, and Fingigan Territory, forming a complete map of the northern region. You should still remember the city building plan I mentioned earlier. By then, the vast territories between the Pioneer Territory, Grizzly Castle, and Fingigan City will be connected as a whole, and the same laws and policies will be implemented. The fiefdom and territorial ownership rights of all nobles will be reclaimed. As Dallin asked doubtfully, "My lord, most nobles don't have family businesses to run. If their land is taken away directly, and they lose the power to collect land rent and taxes, I'm afraid they will be on the verge of bankruptcy. Will this provoke resistance from them?" "I don't intend to seize the land directly by force," Harvey interrupted the chief advisor's concerns. "On the contrary, I will acquire the land from them by purchasing it. Under the new territorial laws and systems, I will feed their already poor people and form a professional army to protect their industrial wealth. As long as they follow my rules, they will earn far more than before, and naturally they won't have the slightest desire to resist." With the opening of the Jackdaw Ridge Tunnel, It will only take half a day to travel from Pioneer Territory to Jackdaw Town, just across the mountain. Even the more distant Grizzly Fort will only take a full day. And that's by horseback, car, or bicycle. With the arrival of more advanced rail and train transportation, the travel time could be shortened several times. As for the more southerly administrative areas of Fingigan City and Sancher Town, a railway might not be built anytime soon, but the sailless magic-powered boats plying the Ralph River, with a maximum travel time of 2 days, could more than make up for the distance. Build roads before you get rich is a practical truth in any world. Reiner was very pragmatic. Upon hearing this, he immediately took out the account book of the mayor and said, "Excuse me, sir. With the current fiscal surplus of the pioneering territory, it is simply unrealistic to want to buy all the land from the nobles. We don't have that much money. Printing gold and dollar banknotes on a large scale will cause prices in the territory to soar, and the private currency you issue will also depreciate rapidly. This will cause big problems." Harvey smiled slightly, and took out a stack of documents from the desk drawer as planned, pushing them in front of his 2 loyal subordinates, who said, "I want to buy land from them with real money." As Dallin picked up the document with swift eyes and hands, and the soul fire in his eyes quickly condensed. He finished reading it quickly in less than half a minute, but his tone revealed confusion that was rare for an alchemical life form. "Stocks? Stocks? What is this? Is this a new currency you plan to issue?" "You can think of it as a right to share in industrial dividends that can be bought and sold," Harvey explained briefly, simplifying the issuance and operation of stocks. "In short, it's a security. Owning it is equivalent to owning the right to receive dividends from the operating profits of a particular industry, but that's limited to dividends." Harvey wouldn't let the management and control of his own industries fall into the hands of others. After handing over their fiefdoms and land ownership, the nobles simply needed to follow their experience and vision and choose the fast-growing manufacturing projects Harvey had provided them. By purchasing shares of equivalent value and holding them, they would reap a steady stream of operating dividends, just like counting money at home. Food factories, steel mills, shipyards, perfume and soap factories, textile mills, any manufacturing industry that impacted people's livelihoods, even the railway and inland waterway industries currently under development would issue corresponding shares. Without spending a single pound, Harvey could use these golden egg-laying territories to exchange for land and population from the nobles, simultaneously dismantling their ancient and theft power and class status. This was a truly remarkable, bloodless, open scheme. After the city is officially built, the City Hall of the Pioneer Territory will be directly transformed into the Central City Hall, and the municipal management departments of other cities will be directly under the jurisdiction of the central government. Similarly, the Territory Police Department and other subordinate departments also need to be copied and replicated to other cities intact. Harvey threw this difficult problem directly to his 2 subordinates. "So your most important job next is to quickly expand the enrollment and reserve a large number of administrative management talents, select them from public schools, promote them from various departments. No matter what method you use, you must set up the municipal management department framework of Sancher Town and Fingigan City as quickly as possible. Maintaining the administrative management and daily operations of a city and surrounding areas requires a large number of manpower. In this ignorant era with a literacy rate of less than 1%, relying solely on the literacy education in public schools popularized by Harvey in a pioneer territory cannot meet such a large talent gap. It was inevitable to bring in nobles who had already received an old-fashioned elite education. Many of these individuals were heirs trained by various families, so they were naturally familiar with business management. With a brainwashing re-education, outstanding individuals would undoubtedly emerge. Just like the relatively upright yet active young nobles like Ross Ralph he'd met in Fingigan City, they were perfect candidates. He had no problem training such individuals to join the municipal administration and run a city or surrounding towns on his behalf. After outlining the administrative matters of the vast new territory, Harvey took a few sips of his hot tea, patiently waiting for Asdalin and Reiner, who remained stunned, to digest his numerous instructions. Although these 2 were his longest-serving trusted followers, one was a lowly watchmaker, the other lived in an ancient world even more backward than today. It was difficult for them to fully grasp Harvey's modern thinking. Fortunately, they were pure alchemical beings who had undergone soul transformation. Blessed by their absolute rationality, their logical thinking and efficiency far surpassed those of ordinary people, making up for their temporary ideological lag. After all, If Pierce and the others were to take charge, Harvey would most likely end up with a group of die-hard military operatives sweeping away all aristocratic forces in the territory, completely annihilating the aristocracy on a physical level. Perhaps even an alternate world version of Yellow Robe would ensue, placing Harvey on the throne and making him an upgraded and enhanced version of Grand Duke St. Valen. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 405 Active Exploration. In the Frontier Territory, at the Academy of Magical Sciences, Sirius and Counselor Prahl sat in the first-floor lounge, enjoying a relaxed chat with several colleagues while sipping high-end black tea imported from the south. This black tea was a luxury commodity supplied exclusively to Harvey's frontier territory by the fleet of the Pharaoh's Royal Chamber of Commerce, which sailed north along the Ralph River after Sancher Town was officially incorporated into the territory. It fetched a high price in Pharaoh's itself, and in the frontier territory, it reached as high as $80 gold per pound, a price most ordinary residents simply couldn't afford. Elder Sirius carefully held a teacup, squinting his eyes to blow away the steam rising from the cup's rim. He slowly drank, his mouth filled with fragrance and sweetness, the tea transforming into a warm current that flowed into his stomach, causing him to sigh with satisfaction. He turned to glance at Patriarch Arturo, who sat on the other side of the sofa. He was clad in a jet-black robe, revealing only a terrifying metal skull-like head. A slender energy pipe dangling from the ceiling connected tightly to the charging socket at his waist. The speaker used to enjoy tea, too, Councilman Prahl sighed. The soul fire in Arturo's eyes suddenly lit up, and he chuckled, worldly enjoyment and desire will only hinder our pursuit of truth. Humph, the research team led by the two of you has lagged far behind me. He raised his hand and a palm-sized miniature wolf spider crawled out from under his robe and took a document from the bookshelf on the wall for him. You are still hesitating and unwilling to accept soul transfer like me. You are simply wasting precious time. Prahl and Sirius looked at each other and smiled bitterly. Speaker, think about the days when we were discriminated against, hiding and fleeing everywhere. Who would have thought that we could live the life we have now? Can't we, old bones, enjoy 2 days of good life? The promotion path of the undead spellcasting faction was blocked. Even Lord Harvey could not find out the truth and find a feasible way to solve it. The pseudo-high-level people like the three of them, who had just changed their research direction, were even more helpless. Now, having finally arrived in the north, settled in this new homeland free from discrimination and persecution, and blessed with such a favorable research environment and living conditions, many of the older necromancers have turned their attention to training the next generation, accumulating and developing new forces for the undead spellcasting faction. The Lord has approved our secret deployment of personnel to recruit and shelter isolated necromancers in the Southland. As long as they are upright and have a decent attitude, they can be assessed and observed before joining the Magic Academy. Prahl said this with a hint of regret. Perhaps, we old bones will be the last necromancers in this new homeland who have suffered hardships and discrimination. Everyone, are you here enjoying tea again and reminiscing about the good old days? A teasing voice came from outside the door. It was Duncan, who had just returned to the academy from the Lord's castle, followed by two students, the Eye of Illusion and the Astrologer. The three necromancers rose, touched their chests, and greeted them with the standard etiquette of ancient wizards. Under Lord Harvey's fair and impartial attitude, his orthodox spellcasters showed no disdain or dislike for the necromancers. They all interacted on a rare level, and their daily relationships were quite harmonious. How did Lord Duncan find time to come to the academy today? Arturo was a little surprised. These three high-ranking necromancers were clearly battle mages, and while they nominally led research teams, they had little interest in spending years in the lab. Duncan was very straightforward. He raised 3 fingers and said, Dean Arturo, I am about to lead a team of spellcasters to explore the depths of the wilderness. I need to ask you for 3 outstanding necromancers to join my expedition team. Sirius was shocked and asked quickly, Your Excellency, are you planning to take the initiative to attack and find out the situation of the enemy in the center of the mysterious continent, deep in the wilderness? Duncan nodded and answered frankly, Yes, this is also a task I took on my own initiative. Instead of sitting there in panic and waiting for the legendary terrifying alien race to move south, It is better to take the initiative to attack and find out their origins and details. This requires crossing the ice field densely populated by evil orc tribes, and part of the wilderness ruled by the demons. Sirius did not expect that this high-level shapeshifter was so bold that he actually took the initiative to ask the Lord for this arduous exploration task. Duncan nodded solemnly. So, when selecting team members, the Lord allowed me to come here in person to solicit your opinions. Of course. I will also inquire about the specific candidates' willingness to join later, and I will definitely not force them. The Lord has taken in a group of necromancers like us who have been discriminated against and oppressed at every turn, and provided us with an academy where we can freely conduct research. He has even pointed out a completely new direction for the development of our faction, Arturo said in a deep voice. There is no reason for a necromancer to refuse to serve the Lord. Moreover, this is a matter of great importance to the continuation and survival of the entire race, Prawl said worriedly. But just to reach the legendary land of eternal night where Mr. Asdalin used to live, it requires crossing thousands of miles. If we have to go deeper into the permafrost further north, I don't know how much time it will take and how much hardship we will endure to reach it. The Eye of Illusion, which had been holding back for a long time, finally couldn't help it any longer. Before its teacher could start to explain, it excitedly boasted, Sir Harvey has secretly developed a magical artifact that can be called miraculous. It can allow ordinary mortals to fly freely into the sky like high-level spellcasters, and overlook the earth like a bird. His eyes revealed a fanaticism, and he became more and more excited as he spoke. No, not only can it fly into the sky, but it can also stay in the sky for a long time. It can move with the wind. It is said that during the first test, it only took a few hours to secretly fly from outside the territory to the eastern basin. It can make mortals fly into the sky. Arturo stood up suddenly, and the soul fire in his eyes also lit up. It can also move freely. In a few hours, it can reach the eastern basin hundreds of miles away. Sirius hurriedly asked, flying artifact? Necromancer. Is it the legendary flying artifact? Whether caster or alchemist, each crafted magical implement requires a magic matrix inscribed within it. Upon use, the implement is activated by drawing upon the magic power drawn from meditation. This is why low-level spellcasters often can't easily control high-level magical implements. This is essentially because their own magic power isn't strong enough to match the magic power required by the implement. High-level spellcasters, on the other hand, often already possess the ability to fly, and naturally don't need a flight implement. At most, they utilize amplification devices to increase their speed or mitigate the immense mana consumption associated with flight. Where did you get this flying implement? The usually taciturn astrologer asked, clearly unsure how it worked. It's clearly just a giant softball, Lord, yet somehow it's so easily lifted into the air. Chapter 406 Hot Air Balloon Test Flight. In the back garden of the Lord's castle, something lay hidden beneath a rainproof tarp. This was the miraculous artifact the Eye of Illusion had described as allowing mortals to soar, the giant softball the astrologer had referred to. It's still in the experimental stages, so it hasn't been released yet. Harvey gestured helplessly. There's no need to rush. You can come back once the finished product is ready, Arturo replied with a hint of embarrassment. It's simply because Mr. Eye of Illusion and his men have piqued our curiosity. Lord, please forgive our impertinence and disrespect. We too want to see this incredible miracle as soon as possible. It's not a miracle, just a hot air balloon. Harvey raised his hand, having his guards lift the tarp, revealing a pile of enormous, somewhat haphazardly stacked animal hides. Why is this a pile of hides? Wasn't it supposed to be a strange softball? Sirius and Prawl circled the hides, puzzled. It's like this when it's not inflated. Wait a moment while the guards prepare it, Harvey signaled to the guard captain, Tommy, who immediately, with an excited expression, led several warriors forward and began to fiddle with a pile of animal skins. During the first test flight, Harvey had let Tommy and the others take the risk. Of course, he also recruited Duncan to act as a first responder in case of an emergency landing. In the event of an accident in midair, he could at least transform into a giant flying griffin to protect the testers. Soaring like a bird is an eternal dream for an intelligent race like humans, confined to Earth. From hot air balloons to airships, airplanes to spacecraft, Harvey, in his previous life, had witnessed the immense sacrifices humans made in their pursuit of flight through exploration and challenges, only to finally achieve their dream. While spellcasters exist in the current magical world, flight remains the privilege of a select few high-ranking transcendents. Even those at the pinnacle of transcendental power cannot claim unfettered control of the skies. The magic power consumed by performing flight spells far exceeds that of any other type of spell. Even shapeshifters like Duncan, who can transform into a bird at will, must precisely calculate their magic power consumption during the process to avoid accidental falls. The principle of a hot air balloon is quite simple, and the materials and techniques required for its construction are not difficult. It only requires a source and a continuous supply of gas fuel, as well as suitable balloon material. In the absence of chemical industry-provided high-pressure gas storage containers, using magical energy instruments as combustion devices to heat the air provides a continuous supply of heat energy for the balloon, a relatively perfect alternative to the modern technology of filling high-pressure cylinders with hydrogen. The material for the airbag was much simpler. A species of gregarious demonic beasts, a subspecies of demonic riding beasts native to the northern wastes, miraculously grew 2 layers of hide, the outer layer as hard as armor, the inner layer flexible and thin. Combined with a rubber coating, this created a perfectly airtight airbag, not only highly waterproof and leak-proof, but also impervious to even the sharpest cuts. The guards brought a large wicker basket from a nearby shed and deftly connected it to the coated hide with several thick ropes. They then retrieved a simple metal cylinder and poured a test tube-sized amount of liquid magic energy into it from the top. Pulling the trigger on the side of the cylinder, steam soon began to emanate from the top. The operator immediately stretched the bottom of the hide airbag, aligning the metal cylinder's outlet with it. The airbag slowly inflated, truly looking just as the astrologer had described, a large, soft, round ball. To ensure at least 3 people could be carried simultaneously, Harvey, along with fellow alchemists Chris, Benoit, and others, conducted repeated experiments before finally settling on a standard 6-meter diameter at its widest point. Sewing this massive animal hide airbag alone required the inner hides of 20 magical beasts. Add to that the repeated application and drying of the rubber fruit coating, and it took over 2 weeks to create this seemingly crude flying vehicle. Without the caster's own magic power, just relying on this steam-belching alchemical cylinder, can make this giant soft ball fly. The 3 necromancers from the academy exchanged bewilderment, then asked Harvey. Harvey sighed and hesitated for a moment before explaining, yes, hot air rises and cold air sinks. This is a very common natural phenomenon. As research-based spellcasters, we should have observed this simple common sense that contains the operating principles of all things long ago. Arturo's tone was a little confused, and he murmured, natural phenomena, simple common sense, contain the operating principles of all things. Shouldn't research-based spellcasters always observe the generation and operation rules of magic power? Why do they need to understand hot and cold air? Harvey shook his head helplessly, closed his mouth and said no more. To let these self-proclaimed extraordinary spellcasters come into contact with modern scientific enlightenment knowledge, I am afraid there is still a long way to go. It is better to start from the children and change the masses imperceptibly in the popularization of basic education. Amidst the bewildered expressions of the high-level spellcasters, the animal hide balloon finally inflated and slowly rose. The pre-installed tow ropes gradually tightened, and 4 or 5 soldiers quickly stepped forward to tug and control it, preventing it from launching itself into the air, carrying the enormous wicker basket with it. Wow! It's really flying. Harvey raised his hand in an inviting gesture, smiling. This half-finished hot air balloon can only carry a maximum of 3 people. For someone with an alchemical body like Dean Arturo, it's too heavy, so I don't recommend trying it. The rest of you can take turns. Before he could finish his words, Elder Sirius and Councilman Prahl had already climbed in. They were typical research-oriented spellcasters, and since their magical patterns hadn't yet been successfully engraved with a flight spell, they were most eager to experience the feeling of flight. Immediately afterwards, the Eye of Illusion also flipped over and entered the basket, smiling. Although I know how to fly, I'd like to try this method of flight that doesn't consume my own magic power, and can also protect my 2 fellow mages if necessary. With a slight sway, the guards who had been tightening the ropes loosened their grip, and the hot air balloon, pulling the massive basket below, slowly lifted off the ground, gradually climbing upward. Soon passing over the towering spire of the Lord's castle. Those on the ground squinted upward, still able to clearly see the 3 people in the basket peering down, their faces filled with excitement. Oh no, Harvey slapped his head. I forgot to teach them how to operate the alchemical heating device, Mr. Duncan. Duncan nodded helplessly, his metal prosthetics scraping against his flesh and bone with a fierce sound. He quickly transformed into a massive flying griffin, soaring into the air and chasing the hot air balloon as it soared higher and higher. Chapter 407 Central Station. Baron's apartment door banged at dawn. He leaped from the bed, instinctively reaching for his coat, which hung on the hanger by the bed. He had his hand halfway out when he suddenly remembered that, starting today, he no longer had to attend rehearsals at the People's Theater. 2 weeks ago, Baron had officially resigned from his position as the lead actor in the troupe. 2 identical work dispatch documents lay beside his bed, one approving his transfer from Culture Minister Ash Lambert, and the other, from the territory's Central City Hall. The 3-story apartment building's exterior walls were incredibly sturdy and thick, completely blocking out the harshest cold of late winter. Thick copper pipes, half exposed and embedded within the walls, provided a constant stream of warmth throughout the room. The desert experiences a lukewarm climate for about half the year, so a house like this, free of leaks and drafts, is a rare find for most of the local residents, accustomed to hardship. Except, it's a bit small, barely enough for a single man like Baron. He's even embarrassed to invite friends over, like Miss Natalie Mills. Baron reluctantly opened the door, only to find Ross, a new colleague he'd just met. He introduced himself as being from Fingigan City in the southern border, a city that had recently been brought under the Lord's jurisdiction, and he'd been surprised to see residents moving in so quickly. "Hi, Ross." Baron turned sideways to let the visitor into the house, but found that the other party was standing motionless at the door. "Come in and talk, it's too cold outside." Ross, with a gaunt face and tall figure, frowned and said, "Why did you get up just now? Hurry up and take your luggage and go to the central station with me. You didn't pack your things last night, did you?" Baron turned around and pointed at the suitcase that had been packed and placed by the door, and asked in confusion, "It has been packed a long time ago. According to the instructions on the transfer order, shouldn't we leave in the afternoon?" Ross rolled his eyes, bent down to pick up the heavy suitcase for his half-orc colleague, and urged helplessly, "Hurry up and put on your clothes. Don't forget to bring your ID and work documents." "Why don't you ask? The central station is packed with people. If you go too late, I'm afraid you won't even be able to get on the bus." Baron came to his senses with a start, returned to the bedroom to put on a thick coat, stuffed all the documents neatly stacked into the inner pocket of his clothes, and hurriedly walked with Ross to the east gate of the territory. The newly built central station is located next to the east gate. After a full half-hour's walk, the two finally reached the territory's east gate. They found it already bustling with activity. A large number of heavily clothed residents gathered near the city walls, swarming through the gate and heading out. "So many people," Baron gasped. "I remember the recruitment notice for the East Expansion Project clearly stated it was only accepting 2,000 official local residents." Ross sighed, pointing to the many empty-handed and unladen people, and speculated, "It's the train. They're here to see the rumored magical train the Lord personally built, capable of swiftly traversing the rails." Baron gazed at the now bright sky and finally understood Ross's urging for him to arrive early at the central station. Just queuing and squeezing through the crowds would likely take them several hours. The central station, built along the edge of the territory's city wall, occupied a vast area. 2 crisscrossing tracks ran straight through the vast station, extending in 4 directions, east, west, south, and north. However, only the southeastern tracks were clearly complete, flanked by dense wooden stakes and ropes to prevent people from accidentally walking onto the tracks. A dozen or so terraced cubicles had been built directly opposite the entrance, each with a prominent ticket office sign. However, they were not yet officially open to traffic, and the ticket office was clearly unstaffed. Near noon, Ross and Baron, sweating profusely, finally reached the ticket office. Just as they were about to retrieve their transfer documents, they turned and spotted a large sign on the side of the vast station hall. "Pioneering Territory Eastward Expansion Plan. Recruitment Registration Office." While Baron was still squinting to decipher the characters, Ross recognized the sign in a split second and dragged Baron toward it. Many of the territory residents, similarly carrying large luggage, were also waiting in line beneath the sign. The uniforms were clearly those of the City Hall staff. After carefully checking the 2 people's identification and work documents, they were led to the platform. The magical train, quietly resting on the long track, immediately astonished the passengers about to board it for the Eastern Basin. Beyond its massive front end, brimming with the aesthetics of heavy machinery, it boasted 10 massive carriages mounted in a row behind it. They shared a mechanical chassis, a metal frame clad in iron sheets, and a tightly covered roof covered in tarpaulin, forming a single, enclosed carriage. "Ross, aren't we the first territory residents to ride this new contraption?" Baron gazed at the massive, black metal train on the platform. No matter how he looked at it, it resembled a string of war beast vehicles. The City Hall employee who led them to the train explained with a smile, "There are 2 trains to the Eastern Basin. One was dispatched before you arrived, and it's fully loaded with nearly 500 people." As he finished speaking, 2 people jumped out from the front of the train in the distance and waved quickly to the crowd who were afraid to move. "Don't waste time. It's almost time. Let's get this group on board." Baron and Ross clutched their luggage tightly and carefully searched for the carriage marked number 7, just like their tickets. They followed the crowd and carefully boarded the train. "There are seats," Baron exclaimed in surprise. Although they were just a few rows of wooden benches fixed to the carriage, at least they didn't have to sit on the cold metal floor. The windows were covered with tarpaulins, so as long as they didn't open them, they wouldn't feel too cold. Soon, 3 loud whistles blared from the distant locomotive. Then, the carriage suddenly began to vibrate slightly and rhythmically. The clanking of wheels against rails echoed beneath their feet, and everyone inside felt their bodies sway. The train was moving. Everyone lifted the window tarpaulins beside them and looked out, only to find that everything outside was slowly receding, accelerating. The train pulled out of Central Station. The residents watching from outside the station saw the train pull out again and cheered loudly, waving goodbye to the passengers. Baron leaned over the window and waved vigorously for a while. Only after the train clanged away did he sit down, still reluctant to leave. "I wonder how long it will take us to reach the Eastern Basin." Ross carefully flipped through the work documents and checked them before answering. "The documents say we will arrive at our destination at noon tomorrow, but there is a train stop along the way, and we will probably spend the night there." Baron then remembered and asked curiously, "Ross, you have only been in the territory for less than a month. How did you get formal resident status? And why did you take the initiative to apply to go to the Eastern Wilderness?" Ross rolled his eyes at him and did not answer. The Lord had already given him the answer he wanted when he brought him from Fingigan City to the wilderness. "Do you want to know why my territory is so prosperous and wealthy? Follow my people to explore and progress, and you will experience the changes and differences firsthand." Chapter 408 Food and Assessment. The long winter of nearly 5 months finally ended. When the warm sunlight reappeared over the northern wastelands, it was already March of the following year. The pressing task of spring plowing immediately confronted Harvey and the territory's city hall. They had been engaged in numerous battles throughout the winter, receiving a steady stream of refugees from the south, displaced by war and famine. Food and supplies had been consumed at an alarming rate. Due to the rapid population growth and the lack of supplies, Harvey's pioneer territory's food reserves were at an unprecedented critical point. Harvey secretly thanked the Ministry of Agriculture for handing over the magically enhanced grain seeds cultivated in the territory when he annexed Grizzly Territory last year. They were then forced to distribute them throughout the southern Grizzly Territory, harvesting a crop of winter wheat before the onset of midwinter, temporarily alleviating the food shortage. The next most important task, of course, was to divide the magically enhanced crop seeds into 2 batches, one to be distributed throughout Fingigan City in the south and the eastern basin of the wasteland. So, on the very day the magic-powered train carried the pioneers to the eastern basin, Harvey convened a mobilization meeting for the territory's agriculture. He summoned not only the pioneer territory's Ministry of Agriculture, but also the entire newly restructured Central City Hall, including Grizzly Territory's secondary municipal departments, and the Fingigan City Municipal Administration Department, which had arrived earlier. All relevant senior officials were summoned to the Lord's Castle. Gazing at the several long tables below the stairs, filled with officials of all ranks, Harvey felt that even the Grand Duke of St. Valen's Royal Court Council was roughly the same size and presence. Judging by the size of the territory he controlled, it seemed almost as large as a third of the entire Duchy of St. Valen. He wondered why the Grand Duke himself, currently engaged in a war with the wizard kingdom of Danius on the duchy's borders, would think of him, a wizard lord who had secretly raided his base. Harvey gathered his scattered thoughts, surveyed the hall, and gently tapped the wooden armrest of his chair. The noise wasn't too loud, and the crowd, previously whispering among themselves, suddenly fell silent, their gazes turning to the Lord. Harvey gestured to the work documents before them and chuckled, You're probably all wondering why the spring plowing, which proceeds so routinely every year, is labeled mobilization and requires a general meeting. Indeed, a lord's foreign campaigns require mobilization, as his vassal nobles and ennobled knights are scattered throughout the territory, and gathering them takes time. Similarly, mobilization is required for food, fodder, horses, and laborers. Besides the lord's own reserves of food and weapons, extracting the extra taxes and wheat from the people takes time and effort. He'd never heard of mobilization being required for farming. To feed their families, most people would cultivate their fields and produce food on their own initiative, without the urging of the nobles. I believe many people are well aware that I am not a hereditary noble or a royal vassal. I initially acquired this pioneering territory by simply purchasing the pioneering order from the previous Earl of Fagin, Harvey explained nonchalantly. And the pioneering territory has been able to develop to this day simply because when I recruited the refugees from the wilderness, I promised that as long as they worked hard for me, they would never go hungry, ensuring that the people under his rule had enough food to eat, warm clothes to wear, and comfortable homes to shelter from the wind and rain, was the only way for Harvey to maintain the correctness of his rule, instead of relying on the enfeoffment of titles and conquest by force like other nobles. In the past 3 years, we have basically achieved this. The frontier territory has also expanded from a small wasteland town outside the border to a jurisdiction area close to 1/3 of the principality. Harvey paused, his tone becoming serious. But right now our food production can't keep up with the population growth rate. If we don't pay attention, once the people go from having enough to eat every day to being hungry, our internal situation will immediately become turbulent. He gestured to the officials attending the meeting to open the work documents in front of them, and explained in a deep voice, "Therefore, I require everyone to immediately regard agricultural development and food planting as top priorities, and meticulously complete this year's spring farming tasks according to the work charter in front of you, and starting this year, the agricultural development and food production of municipal departments across the territory will be subject to special assessments. Whether it is the cultivated area, the number of farmers, or the land output, they will become my assessment tasks, and this will also become an important criterion for measuring whether you are qualified to serve as managers of lower-level municipal departments." The new Earl of Fagin's heart skipped a beat, and he immediately lowered his head and began to quickly flip through the work documents. Grizzly County had recently announced a policy whereby the Lord would exchange so-called dividend shares from its various manufacturing industries for land ownership from smaller nobles. Under the Lord's powerful threat of force, all the smaller nobles voluntarily surrendered their lands, and all of Grizzly County's land was now publicly owned by the City Hall. This heavy burden fell directly on Earl Fagin, newly promoted to the position of City Hall's head, and it was undeniable that he was sweating profusely. The Lord's words were clear: from now on, the title of nobility was merely an honorary one. If one failed to meet his standards, even the rank of Earl would lose the power to govern the city. Although no one in the hall spoke aloud, all silently poring over the documents, their gestures and expressions clearly indicated their nervousness. This was exactly what Harvey had intended. While honorary titles could be inherited, officials holding territorial administrative positions could not be lifelong or hereditary. Only through competitive assessment could the vitality and advancement of the power structure be guaranteed. It all began with the assessment of grain production. I haven't set too high a target for the first year. It gives you time to adapt and adjust. Harvey patiently waited for everyone to turn to the end of the document before explaining. Only in terms of grain production, I require you to meet the figures noted on the document. A wave of gasps erupted in the meeting hall. 100,000 bushels? 40% wheat, 60% barley and other crops. Harvey wasn't surprised by the crowd's reaction. After all, based on the normal grain production levels of the era, a city like Grizzly Territory with a population of 10,000 would yield around 10,000 bushels annually. Fingin City, with its more fertile soil, could probably reach 15,000. The Pioneer Territory, which had essentially fully implemented mechanized farming with alchemical beasts, harvested a staggering 35,000 bushels last year, even enough grain from the previous year to feed livestock. At the time, this was considered an astonishing bumper harvest. Of course, actual harvests outside of the Pioneer Territory were closely tied to the size of the land and the number of farmers. Relying solely on primitive farming methods like human labor and horses was simply unrealistic, hoping to achieve Harvey's goals. You don't have to worry. The agricultural alchemy beasts and the improved demonite wheat seeds have been prepared long ago. Harvey stood up and clapped his hands. He first asked the territory's central city hall, headed by Reiner, to take the lead and set an example. The central city hall will directly take on half of the grain production target of 100,000 bushels. Therefore, Fingian City and Grizzly Bear Territory only need to achieve the harvest tasks of 30,000 and 20,000 respectively, as long as a good start can be made in grain planting this year. Harvey believes that as the technology of mechanized planting becomes fully popular in the territory, agricultural production that used to require a large population to maintain will release a large amount of labor. The fewer people working in agriculture, the more workers the territory factories can absorb in the future. Chapter 409, Setting an Example. After the vigorous eastward expansion officially began, the restructured Central Administrative Office, at Harvey's request, officially promulgated the newly revised territorial laws to all residents. The territorial administrative team, led by Reiner and Asdelin, immediately conducted a series of retrospective assessments of the three territories under Harvey's jurisdiction: Pioneer Territory, Grizzly Territory, and Fingian City. These assessments examined officials' past performance, anonymous citizens' satisfaction ratings, and the annual fiscal revenue within their respective areas of responsibility. Using these rigid metrics, it was easy to discern which individuals were suitable for relevant management positions and which were unsuitable for development. To Harvey's surprise, the more educated minor nobles significantly lagged behind the civilian officials who had been promoted earlier in the territory in terms of governance, management, and economic development. After the evaluations, nearly half of the minor nobles were excluded, labeled unsuitable for territorial administration. Logically speaking, I have given these small nobles enough opportunities to catch the last train of territory development. Harvey expressed his helplessness in the face of Earl Figan, who came to complain to him. Since their abilities are not met, they will naturally be eliminated. But at least they don't have to worry about their livelihood. The dividend shares they exchange for land are enough for them to be stable rich men under my rule, as long as they behave themselves. Earl Figan felt the same way. As the largest feudal noble in the border area, the Figan family did not decline and perish after completely submitting to Harvey. On the contrary, after losing the power of fiefdom and military armament, the Earl himself not only obtained the position of municipal manager of Grizzly Castle from Harvey, but the family also founded two public-private partnership assembly line textile factories with Harvey's support. The operating income of one quarter alone exceeded the land tax collected in the past year, which almost made them laugh in their dreams. The Figan family had, after all, painstakingly boarded this final train, loaded with wealth and power. As for the eliminated lesser nobles, Earl Figan could only go through the motions, putting in a few kind words for them in Harvey's presence. "Sir," Earl Figan asked cautiously. After all, this was the real focus of his meeting with Harvey. Harvey narrowed his eyes, instantly perceiving his intentions. He chuckled. "Why are you so anxious? The train's trial run has only just begun. Next quarter, the railway company will be officially established. You all have the opportunity to participate, trading your initial investment for dividend shares. It's a highly profitable venture. You might as well go back and think about raising more money." Earl Figan had been waiting for Harvey's words. Wasn't this a testament to the principle of those who are close to the water get the moon first? The precise information revealed by the Lord himself was enough to allow his family to act and react twice as quickly as others in their business ventures. After Earl Figan happily departed, Asdelin, who had been standing silently nearby, couldn't help but ask, "My lord, why do you grant the Figan family so many advantages? You've handed over the management of Grizzly Castle to them. Isn't that enough to earn their unwavering loyalty?" Harvey rubbed his fingers together and quipped, "If I needed a role model, wouldn't a Figan family be the most suitable choice?" Indeed, from the very beginning, after a violent conflict with Harvey, even paying the heavy price of the death of an earl, and nearly overthrowing the entire family, they wisely chose to submit to Harvey completely, and subsequently, in a veritable resurgence, not only retaining their hereditary title and the power to govern the city, but also their family wealth and property flourished, making the other nobles envious. The price of resistance was utter destruction, while the benefits of submission were countless, making any sane person choose the former. The Figan family's elite knights were gone, but Lord Harvey's more powerful northern army would directly protect his wealth and assets, and he wouldn't have to pay a cent to support this formidable professional army. It was a huge bargain, no matter how you looked at it. So were the Figan family's fiefdoms, passed down through generations. They traded farmland, which required the hard work of numerous serfs, 4 shares in Lord Harvey's golden egg manufacturing plants. They wouldn't have to worry about managing or even selling their goods, they could just sit back and collect the money on time. Even if the family's future successor turned out to be a complete failure with no business sense, they wouldn't have to worry about bankruptcy or decline. At this thought, the name of a young noble suddenly popped into Harvey's mind. He glanced sideways at Asdalen and asked curiously, "Did Knight Ross of the Ralph family, the young man who voluntarily followed me from Fingigan City to the North Territory, really apply to be a resident of the territory and head east to explore the new lands? Are you asking about Knight Ross of the Frosthock family?" Asdalen was silent for a moment, his tone a little incredulous. "Yes, he's indeed a young man with very unique ideas and behavior. He joined the first group of pioneers on the train to the east 3 days ago. Back in Fingigan City, this young knight of the Ralph family had acted differently from the other nobles. He treated Harvey with neither servility nor arrogance, and was extremely interested in the new order and the popularization of magic in the civilian sector that Harvey described. He hadn't expected him to be so enthusiastic about getting down to the grassroots level upon arriving in the frontier territory. His ideological awareness and mental state truly impressed Harvey. Asdalen said in a slightly quizzical tone, "It's all because of what you said. My lord, have you forgotten, huh?" Harvey was stunned, looking at his chief advisor with a puzzled look. "You proposed, the so-called knights of the new era aren't about blind loyalty to a particular noble, or colluding with him, sucking the blood of the people. Instead, they should understand the importance of fighting for the people and upholding true fairness and justice." Asdalen repeated Harvey's words verbatim. Though his tone was cold and rigid, Harvey felt a sense of shame in his ears. "That's what I said when I was drunk at the Fingigan City dinner." It sounded a bit childish and passionate, and he didn't expect it to actually fool those young noble knights. "You are the most skilled spellcaster I've ever met at using speech to seduce people," Asdalen commented pertinently. "But I still don't quite understand the meaning of your last words that night." Harvey covered his face and asked weakly, "What did I say last?" Pierce just stepped in from the study and took over his mentor's words, repeating, "You said that only by drinking this bowl of chicken soup will they understand the true way of chivalry." "My lord, I'd like to ask, what is the connection between chicken soup and chivalry?" Chapter 410, The Law Issuance. In reality, it wasn't just the young noble knights of the Southern Territory who were unwittingly fed Harvey's chicken soup. Of course, there were also a large number of enthusiastic students from the Frontier Territory's public academy, who considered themselves advanced elements. After the new territorial laws were promulgated, a large notice board stood in the square in front of the central administrative office. Next to it, a thick hardcover book was neatly placed. Its title, inlaid with gold thread on the cover, was concisely written, "The Fundamental Law of the North." This was the territorial law, personally drafted by Lord Harvey and meticulously compiled by various core departments of the administrative office. A week before its official public presentation, the law was distributed to all administrative departments, including the Advanced Education Department of the territory's public academy. The goal was to ensure that current and future territorial administrators were aware of and learned its contents in advance, facilitating their smooth implementation. The public academy's students responded most enthusiastically, even spontaneously coming to the town square where the law was displayed to explain its details to the public. "Everyone," Ivan cleared his throat, "I believe everyone has heard the news that the Lord is about to build a new city in the north, and this new basic law is the general regulation implemented under the rule of the Lord after the city is built. I will explain it to you in detail. If you have any questions, you can ask me directly, or you can go to the administrative hall to seek answers from official personnel." The city hall officials who were standing by to maintain order looked helpless. They did not expect that the job of preaching the law would be snatched away by a group of students. Knowing that the other party had good intentions, they could only smile bitterly, nod and applaud in agreement. First, it is the general outline of the basic law of the North. The content of this part, every article and every word was drafted by a respected lord himself, and is completely different from the corrupt old laws and traditional systems. Article 1. In all territories under the rule of Harvey Floyd, all supreme power belongs to the Lord himself. As soon as Ivan finished speaking, a warm cheer broke out in the crowd. Long live Lord Harvey. Be loyal to the Lord. The student standing in front of the notice board showed a proud expression. Article 2. The central city hall under the Lord's rule is the highest authority in the territory, and it handles all matters in the territory in accordance with the Lord's instructions. The content of this regulation is a bit difficult to understand, and many people who are still struggling in night literacy schools have a puzzled look on their faces. Ivan quickly translated it into plain English. What it means is, if you have any difficulties, please contact the administrative office. The Lord will instruct the administrative office to handle the matter. The onlookers immediately understood, and another round of thunderous applause and cheers followed. Article 3. Upon entering the territory, migrants can obtain official resident status through formal channels. Once officially resident, they will no longer be burdened with a lowly status of slaves, serfs, tenants, or servants. Regardless of origin, race, background, or gender, everyone will be treated equally. This article was straightforward, but the public response wasn't as enthusiastic as before. After all, the local wastelanders and orcs' collective exclusion of southerners was already a common practice, and it would be difficult to change it quickly. However, with this law as a benchmark, at least overt discrimination would be prevented. Article 4. All citizens are protected by the laws of the territory and are entitled to all security and welfare. They also have the obligation to pay taxes, serve in the army, and be loyal to the Lord. Although this article is short, every citizen present felt the same way. They came to the pioneer territory from afar, and the Lord did fulfill his promise to provide housing and food for all the originally displaced citizens. At the same time, based on their benefits of free education and cheap medical care, the territory's tax revenue is almost fixed every year, and there has never been a case of temporary levying of exorbitant taxes. Service is entirely based on voluntary recruitment. The high salaries and benefits of the army, as well as the visibly low casualty rate, have even made soldiering an extremely popular and sought-after profession. Article 5. Nobles and spellcasters are both residents of the territory. Their identities do not confer any special powers, and titles can only be inherited according to the law as honorary titles. As soon as Ivan finished speaking, a whisper arose in the crowd. Isn't this equivalent to directly abolishing the privileges of the nobles? Yes, I've heard a long time ago that the Lord wants to abolish the power of the nobles. From now on, whether in the north or in the Grizzly territory, you no longer have to bow down and salute those noble lords with eyes on the top of their heads. The spellcasters in the territory are actually quite nice people, like Dean Edgener of the Medical Institute. I am willing to respectfully call him Master Mage. Dean Bird of the Spellcaster Academy is also very approachable. My child was selected and will have the opportunity to become a spellcaster in the future. The students waited patiently for the onlookers to finish their discussion before continuing to read out the remaining regulations. Article 6. The personal safety and legal property of the people of the territory are protected by Lord Harvey Floyd and are sacred and inviolable. Article 7. The people of the territory are encouraged to engage in legal business and free trade. They must pay taxes as required. Any business activities must not violate the laws of the territory or harm the interests of the territory. Article 8. The people of the territory shall have the right to free education, the right to freely engage in any work, and the right to freely choose their marriage, without obstruction or discrimination. Ivan spoke clearly and slowly, reciting each article one by one, pausing occasionally to explain the specific meaning and content of the law to the onlookers with the other students, which made the administrative officials watching nod in satisfaction. In the past, laws enacted by the nobility were rarely read and explained publicly to the common people, and the content of the laws even more rarely involved the common people. Even ordinary civilians of free birth were seen by the nobility as mere objects for exploitation and conscription. When conflicts arose, they were often suppressed violently by knights and the army, without any consideration of reason. It was unprecedented for a lord like Harvey to repeatedly mention the people under his rule in his laws. However, the people, who had already enjoyed the benefits of Harvey's rule before the new laws were enacted, were completely convinced of their existence. Their lord, to whom they had wholeheartedly served, had not broken his promise, nor had he deceived them with sweet words. Sturdy and comfortable homes, delicious and filing food, and equal status for all. Not only did everyone reap what they saw, but they also held high hopes for a happy life in the future. A sudden, somewhat abrupt voice emerged from the crowd, caught up in the heated discussion. Soon, more and more people, despite attempts by officials to stop them, passionately joined the discussion. Why don't we just establish our own kingdom in the north? The Lord should be our king, right? We have our own people's army, our own city hall, and a Lord who treats us wholeheartedly. Why can't we establish our own kingdom? The Lord should be our king, our emperor. Ivan and the students present exchanged a tacit glance, their lips curling up imperceptibly. Their true purpose had finally been achieved. Chapter 411, New Army in the Southern Territory. After lingering in Fingigan City for nearly 2 weeks, Commander Pierce finally returned to his home in the wilderness with the Northern Army soldiers who had been dispatched. After swiftly eliminating the remnants of the Ralph family, a temporary power vacuum emerged in Fingigan City and its surrounding areas. Pierce could only await the arrival of City Hall officials from the north while methodically carrying out the subsequent liquidation of the city's nobles. The Ralph family and their vassal nobles had amassed a considerable amount of gold pounds and grain, so before leaving, Harvey ordered the army to provide relief compensation to the city's residents. Most of the tenant farmers and freemen who had been unable to plant their crops due to the fighting received rations sufficient to tide them over for the season. Artisans and small merchants who had been unable to continue their production due to the situation also received tax reductions. The combination of distributing relief and promoting the new policy proved remarkably effective. Not only did the new lord ensure they had enough food for the time being, he also promised to waive any land rent or land tax this year. Such a generous amnesty naturally garnered widespread popular support. Sir, the 500 northern troops stationed in Fingigan City are already recruiting locals to form a new southern frontier army. Upon returning to the territory, Pierce hurriedly reported to Harvey on recent progress. Of the 1,500 northern soldiers who had gone on the expedition, only 1,000 returned. A battalion of 500 remained stationed in Fingigan City, working with the new city hall to stabilize the situation while recruiting new troops according to Harvey's instructions. Harvey personally set the recruitment criteria for the new army. First, excluding aristocratic forces, allowing only freemen or commoners from tenant farmers to join the army. The number of recruits should be kept to a minimum. The plan was to recruit a total of 1,000 men to form 2 new battalions. The new recruits won't be treated the same as the Northern Army. Aside from providing food and lodging, pay and benefits will be reduced by half, according to the Northern Army's standards. Pierce nodded in understanding. He understood that it wasn't that Harvey didn't want to treat everyone equally, but rather that the Northern Army had been painstakingly built since the early days of the frontier territory, earning their preferential treatment through selfless fighting. If these Southerners, already looked down upon by them, were treated the same as them upon enlistment, it would likely cause dissatisfaction among the majority of the lower and middle-ranking soldiers. The police department has also sent some officers there. Applicants who don't meet the enlistment requirements but have clean records would be well suited to join the Fingigan City Police Department. After all, Fingigan City was in ruins, and the lack of a government system couldn't last too long. If they couldn't quickly establish an administrative structure, firmly control the city's situation, and extend their influence to the grassroots, the aristocratic forces that had been subservient for a while would quickly rise to prominence, and the rotten, outdated class order would return. This was an outcome Harvey absolutely refused to accept. Sir, there's something I don't quite understand. Pierce hesitated for a long time. Then couldn't help but ask, why are you simultaneously recruiting troops in Pioneer Territory, Grizzly Fort, and Fingigan City, yet going to such great lengths to rotate the garrisons between them? Pierce's simple understanding was that soldiers stationed in their homeland to defend their homeland had a natural advantage, both in terms of morale and familiarity with the local conditions. But Harvey had gone the other way, dispatching soldiers from each of the 3 locations to garrison in different locations. This truly baffled him. As the commander-in-chief of the army, you haven't figured out the reason for this after all this time. Harvey suppressed a smile as he watched Pierce's face flush. After a moment's pause, he explained seriously, since the establishment of the Northern Army, the soldiers have naturally formed groups because of their backgrounds. You should be well aware of this, right? Pierce was stunned for a moment, and answered honestly, I do know, but this is unavoidable. Whether it's the Wastelanders and the Southerners, or the Orcs and the humans, as long as there is no trouble in public, it is impossible to prevent it in private. Yes, no matter how well the soldiers obey orders in battle, how strictly they follow instructions and fight bravely, they will still subconsciously trust their fellow tribesmen and fellow townsmen in private. Harvey chuckled, with the expansion of our territory, there will be more and more conscriptions and recruitment in various places, and the soldiers' backgrounds will become more and more complicated. He casually gave an example. Soldiers from Fingigan City, soldiers from Grizzly Territory, soldiers from the Wasteland, even soldiers from Sancha Town. If countless factions emerge within your army, I don't need to explain the consequences, do I? Hearing this, Pierce felt a sweat pouring down his spine, and for a moment, he was speechless. Only then did he fully understand the true purpose of Harvey's measures in this regard, to prevent local soldiers from cliques and disrupting military order. By completely dispersing soldiers from different regions and dispatching them to different locations, the army would be better united, without any distinctions between origins. Fingin City is recruiting 1,000 soldiers, Grizzly Territory is recruiting 1,000 soldiers, and the Pioneer Territory headquarters is expanding its army by 2,000. Harvey stood up, patted Pierce on the shoulder, and said reassuringly, "The task of recruiting and training new soldiers is extremely heavy, but we cannot relax even a little bit. By the beginning of this autumn, I want to see the territory's army fully staffed with 10,000 men, all well trained and ready to go into battle at any time." A year or so ago, Harvey would never have dared to dream of commanding an army of 10,000. Not only would he lack weapons and ammunition, but simply feeding these professional soldiers who had no productive work would have been difficult. The rapidly developing and prosperous Pioneer Territory gave him ample confidence. Putting aside the populations of Grizzly Territory and Fingin City, which were over 20 to 30,000, the population of Pioneer Territory alone had swelled to over 50,000. Nearly half the population received even the most basic literacy education. While this would still be considered an extremely low literacy rate in later times, it was a miracle in this dark and ignorant age. They could read and write with rudimentary ease, possessed basic work skills, and understood the many laws and policies promulgated by City Hall. They even possessed a nascent sense of home and ownership. This improved literacy provided Harvey with a sufficient supply of fresh blood, allowing his administrative agencies to recruit sufficient personnel to implement the new policies and technological changes he envisioned. Compared to the seemingly docile, submissive, and ignorant people, these new people under his rule were capable of unimaginable initiative. As Harvey's influence expanded, these new people would spread like a spark, eventually igniting a prairie fire. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 412, Expansion to the East. In the evening, Baron was in his dormitory, carefully flipping through a literacy manual, when there was a sudden knock on the door. "Come in, Mr. Ross," the half-orc said, puzzled. "Why are you here? Have you had dinner yet?" Ross sidled inside, stamping his foot awkwardly and complaining quietly, "I didn't expect the Eastern Basin to be even colder than the Frontier Territory. It's spring, and the snow hasn't melted yet." Baron quickly moved the brazier next to his desk over and said with a smile, "The Eastern Basin can't compare to the Territory. We don't have heating. If the blankets we were given weren't thick enough, we'd probably be too cold to sleep at night. The heating, is that from those copper pipes half buried in the wall?" Ross carelessly took off his half-wet boots and placed his frozen feet by the brazier to warm them. Baron was stunned for a moment and said helplessly, "How long have you been in the north? You don't even understand heating." Ross waved his hand and said casually, "About a week. In short, there are new things everywhere that have never been seen before. No one seems to understand them, but they are very accustomed to the existence of these strange things." He raised his eyes to glance at the literacy book on Baron's desk, curled his lips and smiled. "The Lord actually requires all the people in the territory to learn to read and write. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I would have thought it was a fairy tale." Baron blushed and quickly changed the subject. "You have always refused to tell me why you gave up your good life in the territory and insisted on coming to the east to open up the wasteland. With your ability, I am afraid you are qualified to teach in the public schools in the territory." When Baron was recruiting at the city hall, he immediately realized that Ross wasn't just another local from the wastelands, born into poverty. His demeanor, manners, and demeanor were far superior to those of the refugees from the southern border he'd met. Yet, even this man took the initiative to strike up a conversation with him, and together they applied for a pioneering job in the Eastern Basin. "Teaching? I'm a knight. All I know is swordsmanship. How can I teach?" Ross had initially followed his lord's advice, seeking a true native of the wastelands, so he could get to know the so-called grassroots and witness firsthand how this vast and prosperous wasteland city had grown to its present state. He hadn't expected this honest orc to actually treat him like a close friend, and he couldn't bear to continue the deception. "I'm from Fingin City. You should have heard of it, right?" Ross said in a low voice. "It's funny to say, but in the past in the southern border, I would only see orcs like you in the slave traders market. But in the wasteland, locals like you are free men with great prospects, and I am just a poor man who was defeated and captured. Baron's eyes widened. Are you really a knight? He stood up and circled around Ross twice. A noble knight? Captured by the Lord and then pardoned. Ross rolled his eyes and said speechlessly, how can I fool you? Of course, I don't have the status of a knight or a title now. Just like you. I'm a construction worker at the Dongchuo base. These words did not elicit the expected ridicule from the orcs. Instead, Baron straightened his expression and gave him a thumbs up. Mr. Ross. I think you are nothing like those greedy and stupid nobles in the rumors. You are very upright. He narrowed his eyes and pondered for a moment, as if racking his brains for more words of praise, but his vocabulary didn't allow it. How should I put it? Minister Kenny of the Ministry of Agriculture was once a knight. He even fought in our army himself. Now he serves the Lord and has quickly risen through the ranks. The orc smacked his lips and commented. Like the Lord said, wealth and a future are earned through hard work, not through plundering and exploiting others. Ross hummed and pressed. So, do you truly believe that the Lord will lead you to an unprecedented life of comfort and prosperity? Baron was surprised. Of course. Everyone has enough food and clothing, a decent job with a good salary, and a warm and comfortable home. I'm afraid your previous lord couldn't do that. Duke Ralph, while not a tyrannical lord, he simply never took the people under his rule seriously. To him, they were just cheap labor, heads to collect taxes, and future recruits. And this Lord Harvey, even in the very laws and regulations he promulgated, repeatedly mentioned and cared about the people he ruled. Lord Harvey is indeed a very different lord. Early the next morning, the East Expansion base, built next to the train station, was bustling with activity again. A new batch of pioneer workers, luggage in hand, disembarked from the train, curious and guided by officials from the Frontier Development Department. They settled into the temporary dormitories built at the base. This base, capable of accommodating over 2,000 people, had been hastily constructed by workers from the Territory Construction Department at the beginning of winter, braving the snow and freezing temperatures. According to the Lord, the people who were willing to dedicate themselves to the territory's frontier development and diligently work at the East Expansion base should be provided with food, clothing, shelter, and transportation by the City Hall, and should not be allowed to suffer in vain far from home. Baron and Ross applied for construction jobs, one of the few jobs in the territory that didn't require advanced education or training. Baron had held this position before, so he was naturally familiar with it, even taking Ross, who was a bit unfamiliar, with him. These newly reclaimed farmlands have only just been sown, and already building such a large warehouse? That's a bit too hasty, Ross said, following Baron's instructions, clumsily repeating the cement and bricklaying tasks. Baron's hands were much more skilled than his. While applying cement mortar skillfully, he explained with a smile, don't worry, after planting spring wheat, you can harvest it in summer. Then continue to plant winter wheat and harvest it before it snows. Ross was stunned for a moment, as if he didn't react. What? Harvest 2 crops of wheat a year? What nonsense are you talking about? Although Ross's family is also a branch of the Ralph family, they are not upper nobles who do not engage in production at all. They have some understanding of farming. At least they know that in the bitter and cold climate north of the Divine Ridge Mountains, it is impossible to harvest wheat twice a year. If we continue farming the way we used to, we naturally won't be able to harvest twice. Haha, let alone twice, even once would be difficult. Baron rubbed his hands together, pulled out a rough cigarette from his pocket, and held it between his lips. Before coming to the frontier territory, my tribe of orcs lived alongside human refugees. Most of the time, we worked hard year-round. When the wheat harvest came, a sudden, heavy snowfall wiped out the harvest. In the end, everyone had to rely on digging up cassava tubers, gnawing on tree bark, and drinking snow water to survive the entire winter. Ross's eyes darkened, and he changed the subject, asking, then how did the Lord manage to grow wheat in the wilderness and still have a stable harvest? It's the magic of the spellcasters. Baron smiled, puffing out a puff of smoke. Don't forget that the Lord himself is a powerful spellcaster. The other spellcasters under his command each have their own strengths. Dean Egno founded the infirmary, where he can even cure cold plagues and bloodworms. Mr. Chris built the alchemy laboratory. Those alchemical beasts you see throughout the territory and here, doing the heavy lifting for us, were created by him. He paused, then smiled at Ross, who looked stunned. They also imbued wheat seeds with magical powers, making them immune to cold and drought, and even to common crop pests in the wasteland. Once sown in the soil, wheat grows faster than the hair on your head. Ross opened his mouth, but found himself at a loss for words. Spellcasters, more arrogant and superior than the nobles, would actually condescend to look upon ordinary people, offering assistance to ensure their food, clothing, and livelihood? Chapter 413 In the Name of Spark. As the outline of the newly promulgated law was widely publicized throughout the territory, the overwhelming majority of the people responded enthusiastically. The Lord's promises to them since the beginning of the development had been fulfilled, and they had every reason to believe that under his leadership, a more prosperous and comfortable future awaited them. News of the upcoming founding of the pioneer territory quickly spread among the people, further fueling their enthusiasm. In just 2 weeks, not only did the number of people enlisting at the military double, but even the recruitment rate for newly opened factories doubled. Only the new laws prohibiting the trafficking of human beings and completely abolishing serfdom stumped Reiner, the pioneer territory's chief administrator, and someone who had personally participated in the law's formulation. "My lord, I've truly misjudged myself on this matter." Reiner approached Harvey and admitted his mistake. The officials and secret police dispatched by the administrative office to the southern part of the principality have been in close contact with local human traffickers. Most of the war refugees we're accepting from Sancha Town were resold from slave traders. Harvey paused, then remembered that he had personally inquired about and purchased many refugees displaced by the war in the central southern border from Andrew, a large miner who secretly operated a slave trade. If anything, the passenger ships that continuously arrived at Sancha Town from the lower reaches of the Ralph River, once they reached Harvey's territory, would technically be in violation of the highest law of the territory. "We can only handle this as a special case," Harvey said with a wry smile, summoning a waiter to quickly carry the order down. This was the first time the Lord had exercised his immunity and special pass since the new law was enacted. As for the reform regarding the transfer of land by nobles, it sparked little opposition or protest. These smaller nobles had never benefited much from land grants in the past. Most of them were not direct descendants of major lords, and their fiefs were located in remote areas with poor soil and sparse populations. Some even ruled fewer than 10 households, so they naturally did not care about losing their nominal ownership of the fiefs. I heard that the shepherd knight in charge of the livestock farm in the Ministry of Agriculture, Mr. Ambach Kenny's father, Baron Kenny of Milltown, was one of the nobles who was most active in surrendering land. Reiner cited a typical example to report to Harvey the significant results of the land policy. "Oh? That's the stingy baron who couldn't even pay the ransom for his own son's defeat." Harvey couldn't help but laugh, then asked, puzzled, how did he come to this conclusion? Director Ambici took him to the frontier territory, and at the Agno hospital, he received an alchemical prosthetic leg. After many years, the old baron can finally ride his beloved warhorse again and hunt freely across the wilderness. There were many other minor nobles like him, all planning to sell their land to the central administrative office as soon as possible. They even gathered privately, eagerly discussing which property they should acquire from Harvey to receive the highest dividend and stock returns. Nobles with vast fiefdoms and rich fortunes have all turned their attention to your new railway company. Reiner duly shared some gossip among the nobles with Harvey, indirectly proving that the secret police had not relaxed their surveillance of them. Harvey took a sip of his hot tea and chuckled softly. It shows that even among the nobles there are those with a long-term vision. Who says they only care about immediate gains? Compared to the spontaneous support of the people, the nobles seem to have been completely coerced by Harvey's use of force. On the surface, they appeared to be completely forced to follow him, and could become fence-sitters at any moment depending on the situation. However, only the vassal nobles who had truly tasted the first wave of benefits knew the considerable rewards and wealth that could be reaped from loyally following this mage lord who had suddenly risen from the wasteland. Under Harvey's deliberate guidance and acceptance, many of the Grizzlies nobles, who had initially been hostile to him, made repeated visits to the frontier territory, personally experiencing many new and unprecedented things. These included cozy homes that remain warm even in the depths of winter, HVAC systems that provided a constant flow of hot water at the touch of a button, magic stone lamps that burned throughout the night, and industrial parks that never stopped operating. There were also the rosy-cheeked, well-dressed people, their faces always smiling, the clean, tidy concrete pavement, streets free of sleazy gangs, beggars, and prostitutes. Even the shops and houses were neatly divided and uniformly built, always bustling even on snowy days. The markets were bustling with people, each with money to spend beyond food. Even the banks, once serving only the nobility and wealthy merchants, often had long lines of depositors waiting outside on payday. After lunch, Harvey's direct subordinates, such as Dallin and Pierce, arrived at the Lord's castle and gathered in Harvey's office. After a month-long process of major tasks, including military recruitment, the promulgation of laws, and the launch of the Eastern expansion, they finally reached the final point, the name of the new city to be built in the wasteland. Discussions immediately heated up, each one having their ideal answer in mind. Some officials, who were spellcasters, hoped that the name of the new city would clearly reflect the greatness of the city built by the Mage Lord himself, hoping that it would one day surpass the magical capital of Alair and become the city of truth in the wasteland. The die-hard military loyalists who had originally followed Harvey wanted the city to be named after their lord, thus highlighting the greatness of the First Lord and officially proclaiming his title of King of the Borderlands and Conqueror of the North to the South. Some officials, more neutral, argued that since the Lord's laws prioritize the people, the city's name should naturally reflect this, and would also greatly inspire a sense of belonging and honor among the people. After several heated debates, Harvey, his mind buzzing, decided to have everyone write down their preferred names and place them on the table for everyone to review and compare, ultimately deciding by unanimous vote. It wasn't until sunset that the new city's name and the city's emblem were finally finalized. With Harvey's decisive vote, the frontier territory was finally named Spark City. The city emblem and banner featured a silhouette of the Lord's castle, with silver magical spears crisscrossing beneath and 3 golden 5-pointed stars juxtaposed at the base. The castle silhouette naturally symbolized Lord Harvey Floyd, the interlaced silver spears represented the army's unwavering loyalty to the Lord, and the 3 golden 5-pointed stars represented the Central Administrative Office, the military, and the Academy of Magical Sciences. Chapter 414 City Founding Day. After the busy spring plowing, the warmer weather quickly arrived at the end of April, marking the designated date for the founding of the Pioneer Territory. Harvey, waking up early for a rare occasion, bathed in the castle's hot tub-lined bathroom and had a servant meticulously trim his slightly growing beard. Most independent spellcasters, especially those focused on research, were extremely disciplined in their lifestyles, comparable to the strict doctrines of the church's ascetics who shunned women. Even as he was about to ascend from Pioneer Lord to Lord of a vast fiefdom, Harvey maintained his simple lifestyle. He required little service in his daily life, and female servants were rare in the castle. It was precisely because of this that both his trusted followers, who had followed him through the early days of hardship, and the powerful officials who later joined his ranks, were concerned about his original status as a spellcaster and had no intention of inserting people into his entourage, either overtly or covertly. Even the aristocracy, most keen on relying on women for power, did not dare to make such vulgar requests that would offend spellcasters. After a simple makeover, Harvey began to examine the several suits of formal attire sent by his personal guards. The one sent by the Spellcasters Union was still black with silver trim. Aside from the addition of gold markings on the collar and cuffs, signifying the rank of a high-level spellcaster, it was not much different from his usual dark mage robes. Attending such an important city-building ceremony, choosing attire that clearly reflected the Federation's style would inevitably give his officials and the spectators a hint. Harvey didn't intend to give them any unwarranted associations. The city he had built was definitely not backed by a larger organization, but rather was entirely subordinate to Harvey himself, having grown and prospered through his own abilities. Another set of city lords' uniforms was presented by the nobles of Grizzly Territory. Although Harvey didn't know much about the nobility, he could tell at a glance that it was simply an upgraded version of the Pope's canonized Archduke's regalia, even short of including a pure gold scepter and jeweled crown. However, these nobles had some tact, at least removing the religious symbols of the church from the uniforms, avoiding the terrible situation of flattering the emperor and then backfiring. The final set of lords' uniforms delivered was of a completely different design. Eschewing the cumbersome, traditional formal attire, it instead adopted a simple adaptation of the gentlemanly attire currently popular among the aristocracy and wealthy merchants. It featured a gray-black double-breasted jacket, paired with a pure white shirt and matching, straight-cut trousers. The dark gold cuffs were clearly hand-embroidered, a testament to the craftsmanship. Captain Tommy leaned forward and added quietly, "This suit was sent from the textile factory and custom-made for you by local tailors and embroiderers." The material and workmanship may not be as good as the other two. Harvey narrowed his eyes, a look of satisfaction on his face. No, this one, he would wear the suit, handmade for him by the people, today as he assumed the title of Lord of Spark City. After changing, Harvey rose and headed for the castle hall, where Reiner, Asdalin, and other high-ranking officials were already waiting. Lord. Everyone bowed upon his arrival. Officials from Grizzly Territory, Fingian City, and other territories arrived in the Northern Territory yesterday and are currently awaiting your summons at the Central Administrative Office. Well, let them wait a little longer. How is the preparations for the square outside going? It was completed yesterday afternoon, but the territory's citizens are simply too numerous and too enthusiastic. Even though the roads to the Lord's district were blocked off in advance, many arrived at the civic square last night to wait for the ceremony to begin. Despite several renovations and expansions, the civic square in front of the Lord's castle was still unable to accommodate the tens of thousands of attendees. The defense forces had to block off the main roads leading to the castle district in advance to prevent a dangerous stampede caused by the large crowds. Aside from the thousands of citizens who willingly waited in the square overnight, the rest of the population, unable to enter the castle district, spontaneously gathered in more spacious areas like the municipal square, the sports field, and the market. Well done. The defense forces and the police department certainly had to work hard today, Harvey praised, then led everyone up to the castle's third-floor observation balcony. The Divine Spine Mountains and Jackdaw Ridge in the distance had already transformed into a deep, inky green, with a faint hint of snowy white visible on the peaks illuminated by the sunlight. The civic square directly below the castle was already crowded. Although the Lord's castle was built on slightly higher ground, many of the eagle-eyed citizens still spotted Harvey's figure on the balcony and stood on tiptoe to wave to their lord, cheering and cheering. Harvey couldn't help but curl his lips, smiling and waving back. My lord, it's almost time. Reiner, without having to constantly monitor the clock, could accurately predict the time the ceremony would begin, and he began to urge Harvey on the spot. Let's go, Harvey said with a smile. Upon seeing the Lord appear and ascend the high platform built in the center of the civic square, the onlookers immediately ceased their noisy chatter, their gazes fixed eagerly on the platform. A unanimous, enthusiastic cheer spread across the square. Good morning, my fellow citizens, Harvey's opening remarks, amplified by the alchemical loudspeaker, echoed throughout the square. An administrative official, aided by a spellcaster, quickly activated a magic stone to record this historic moment. More than 3 years ago, I came here with a pioneering order purchased with money, and now, a real city is about to be built on this once uninhabited land. I know that many of you were originally refugees struggling to survive in the wilderness, and some fled from the oppression of the nobles in the south, and some were forced to migrate here because of war, plague and famine. Harvey paused, lowered his eyes and glanced at the dark crowd under the platform, and continued in a deep voice, no matter where you are from or where you come from, now you have firmly taken root here and have your own new home. The evil orcs, demons, the church, the nobles, cannot drive us away from here, and don't even think about taking away our hard-earned wealth. The old subjects who had experienced the invasion of the evil orcs, the expedition of the church and the nobles, and the rampage of the demons in the surrounding areas naturally felt the same way. They raised their fists and responded to Harvey with red eyes. This is our new home, and we will never allow any enemy to take it away from us. Harvey raised his hand to suppress it, and continued, the tragedy you suffered in the past will not happen again. As long as we always unite and keep the greedy and vicious enemies out of our homes, a new life will belong to you, as the supreme ruler of the city to be established. I hereby promise you, my people, that the city Lord Harvey Floyd will never betray the people who follow him, and will never put you in dire straits again. I, my army, my officials, and the spellcasters under my command will always pay attention to and protect everyone in the city. He straightened his body slightly, then raised his right hand to swear, from today on, the Pioneer Territory is officially established as a city, and it will have a new name, Spark City, Spark City. Long live, long live, long live, Lord. Long live the city Lord. The people gathered in the square boiled over, and deafening cheers resounded through the sky. Harvey's speech was simultaneously transmitted through the alchemical loudspeaker to all the areas where people gathered in the territory. For a moment, almost the entire territory was plunged into a sea of celebration. The defense forces and the Northern Army stationed on the city walls also fired their magic artillery without actual ammunition at this moment. The roar of hundreds of salutes echoed over the city, and even the mountains were shocked and echoed. Chapter 415 Stock Issuance. After the city was officially established, Harvey took only a brief day off before beginning to consider his plans for the new year. Ever since the revitalized magic core revealed fragments of ancient memories, he shifted his focus to the southern continent, separated from him by an entire mountain range. The conflict of faith between the Church and the Union, the struggle for survival between humans and demons, none of them could compare to the formidable alien race lurking in the fabled center of the continent, a terrifying enemy referred to as him in the fragments of memory within the magic core. Unknown dangers are always more terrifying than foreseeable adversaries. Harvey had originally intended to exploit the peculiarities of a time traveler and his ingenuity, nimbly navigating the gaps between the struggles of spellcasters, the Church, and the nobility. Hiding in the desolate wilderness, far from the maelstrom of power in the southern region, he maintained a gentle path of development, adhering to the principle of do not offend others unless they offend you. But after learning the truth of ancient history, his remote, desolate private plots suddenly became the front line of an unknown alien invasion, a task that left him sweating and sleepless. With both long-term and immediate concerns, he couldn't afford to relax even a little. He had to focus on the most important tasks at hand. Planning ahead is always better than sharpening the spear at the last minute. The first task was naturally to mediate the conflict within the Duchy of St. Valen. Regardless of the true purpose of the Grand Duke of St. Valen and the Church in initiating this war, as long as Harvey pressed forward from the rear, they would be attacked from both sides, and ultimately forced to turn around and deal with this thorn in their side. This would allow the Federation and the Wizard Kingdom to redirect their efforts and focus on the protracted conflict with the demons. It's said that the Federation has pushed the battle lines north of the Evil Moon Mountains. If they can successfully cut off the demonic front supply chain, they might be able to halt the demon offensive for a long time. After all, if the aliens truly launched a large-scale invasion, the demons entrenched west of the northern border would be a significant force in resisting their southward advance. Perhaps, at that point, they could even replicate the brief alliance between the two races during the Dragon Wars. The best outcome would be to immediately oust Grand Duke St. Valen. Either he could succeed him or establish a puppet to counter public opinion. As long as a large-scale civil war doesn't erupt in the central southern kingdoms, preventing the common people from becoming involved, the potential population of the races won't be depleted. This will allow them to resist and counterattack when the race faces a life-or-death crisis. The second priority is to accelerate the development of Spark City, getting this future bridgehead of war under his rule back on track. After all, in terms of territorial expansion, Harvey could probably expand further than all the lords of the southern duchies combined. The entire north, save for the demon-controlled west, was essentially unclaimed territory, with only scattered primitive tribes like the demon orcs, devoid of even state power. It was only a matter of time before they were annihilated. What he truly lacked was the people to help him develop and build these territories. Harvey had discussed the southern duchies with his officials many times, ultimately deciding to launch the offensive in late summer, nearing the autumn harvest. Naturally, the professional Northern Army would be unaffected. However, the feudal nobility of St. Valen was a different story. Whether they were enfeoffed knights or vassal nobles, they were firmly bound to their fiefdoms and farmlands. No one was willing to abandon their soon-to-be harvested crops and take up arms for war. After all, starving subjects, unable to pay their taxes, would flee, or even unite in rebellion. If Harvey's army suddenly launched an attack on the royal capital, Jinhu City, it would likely catch the Church and the Grand Duke off guard. They would also be able to see that modernized warfare, powered by magically enhanced firearms, is far more complex than the petty skirmishes they've waged against the Federation on the border. Magical weapons factories, alchemical machinery plants, and shipyards are now operating non-stop, with workers working in 3 shifts furiously churning out vast quantities of war reserves. Pharmaceutical factories, canned food factories, and other logistics plants are also operating at full capacity, continuously delivering countless storable and transportable supplies to the vast, sprawling storage areas. The military's recruitment efforts have been even more successful than Harvey anticipated. The battle-hardened Northern Army has expanded its strength to nearly 5,000 men across 10 battalions and is currently engaged in intensive training. The defense force will reorganize its new and veteran recruits before summer arrives, deploying them to garrison locations in Fingigan City and Grizzly Territory. Therefore, the immediate focus still needed to be on the development of Spark City. This brought Harvey back to the issue of population absorption, which had been troubling him from the beginning. He summoned Chief Administrative Officer Reiner to his lord's office. The stocks to be issued in exchange for the land surrendered by the nobles. Have you compiled the statistics for all those industries? Reiner pulled out his ever-present work manual. Sir, I've already compiled the statistics. Aside from the military industry and basic agriculture, mines, forestry, shipping companies, railways, and all civilian manufacturing plants are all on this list. Harvey took it and quickly scanned it. Pleased? Correct, he said. Civilian manufacturing industries will receive 10% of the shares based on their output and revenue, split into tens of thousands of shares for the nobles who paid the land. However, shipping and railway companies will only receive 50%, and these shares will be issued as original shares, which cannot be traded or mortgaged without permission. If they want to cash out later, they can only sell the shares back to me intact. Monetizing the manufacturing industry is a radical measure that is ahead of its time. If Harvey could not afford to buy the land from the nobles, he would not dare to open this loophole easily. Once the shares can be traded, the nobles who have seized the investment opportunity will get wind of it and will be able to grab more benefits before ordinary people. Then Harvey's idea of narrowing the gap between the rich and the poor and alleviating class contradictions will be in vain. The stock issuance cycle is only 1 month. I will not wait for those hesitant speculators who intend to hold the land and raise the price. Reiner hesitated for a moment and asked in a low voice, actually, the administrative office and the military, as well as some colleagues who joined the territory a long time ago and hold management positions in factories and other production departments, are also discussing privately and complaining that they are being denied the purchase of dividend stocks because they do not have aristocratic status. Harvey nodded in understanding. He had actually anticipated this situation a long time ago. This group of officials and soldiers who were originally from civilian backgrounds and achieved wealth and class leaps purely through their own efforts are, strictly speaking, a special group of emerging aristocrats. They have real power, high salaries and benefits, have lived in the territory the longest, and naturally have accumulated much more wealth than ordinary people. While salaries and benefits are generous, they are a gradual process. All properties in the territory belong solely to the lord, and most lack business acumen. Beyond using money to improve their lives, these new nobles lack many other avenues for rapidly accumulating wealth. Nobles who haven't obtained official resident status in Spark City are not allowed to purchase property within the city. Even Earl Fagan, who manages Grizzly Castle for Harvey, sought to purchase a villa in Spark City, but despite extensive inquiries, he was unsuccessful. This policy will continue unwaveringly. As Spark City grows and prospers, the locals who once followed Harvey will realize the immense value of their properties. Being a landlord is far more comfortable than being a shareholder. Playing the stock market can easily lead to ruin. Chapter 416 Floating Airship. Duncan and Harvey stood side by side in the test side of the South Slope base. They looked up at the huge, spindle-shaped strange device in front of them and sighed softly. Lord City Lord, this is what you said, the new flying vehicle? Yes, it can allow ordinary people and low and middle-level spellcasters to fly into the sky without relying on magic and flying spells. The Eye of Illusion, who had personally experienced the rise of a hot air balloon before, circled around the new vehicle with great interest and asked in confusion, "It's not the inflatable sphere at the beginning? I thought you would make a bigger and rounder one that can carry more people." A hot air balloon. In fact, Harvey only provided the design drawings and principles. The ones who were really responsible for the manufacture were Chris and Benoit from the alchemy laboratory. The two alchemists who were completing the final component adjustment and inspection also came out of the man cabin at the bottom of the flying vehicle and introduced the details of the new vehicle to everyone. The aircraft, named the airship by Harvey, appears to be a giant spindle with a sharp front and an oval tail. However, its interior is composed of 6 airbags. This ensures that even if 1 or 2 of these airbags rupture during extended flight, there will be no crash. At most, the aircraft will slow down. Below the spindle's airbags, a semi-enclosed manned pod is suspended by iron cables and steel bars. The front of the pod features a glass window for observation, and the rear, like an ironclad ship, is equipped with a propulsion unit with steering rudders, providing power for takeoff, landing, and hovering. This power source, of course, relies entirely on the magical power core within the pod. As long as there's a sufficient supply of liquid magical energy, the power core continuously fills the pod with hot air, driving the propulsion unit's rotation and allowing the airship to fly smoothly. Blake, White, and Michelle, who had volunteered to join the Northern Expedition exploration team, also came over and asked, "If we have enough magic power, how fast can this airship fly? Can it be as fast as a high-level battle mage?" Harvey laughed and shook his head. He thought he'd have to build a fighter jet to match the speed of a high-level battle mage. Even with a magical power, the airship was only slightly more agile than a regular hot air balloon. Its speed wouldn't increase significantly, but its main advantage was endurance. Chris, however, spoke confidently, "If the power core is running at full speed, the airship can reach half the speed of a regular horse. However, the magic power will be depleted very quickly, and it will run out of energy in less than half an hour. It's best not to try unless absolutely necessary, to reduce the airship's load, except for the steel bars and cables used for the pod base and connections. The rest of the structure is wrapped in rattan and iron sheets, coated with rubberized rubber to ensure windproof and airtightness." This was also why Duncan insisted on Harvey selecting combat spellcasters for this northern exploration mission. Research-level spellcasters with frail bodies couldn't afford to ride in the iron pods for extended periods. The increasingly frigid temperatures further north would quickly freeze them into popsicles in mid-air. Combat mages, especially those from the undead faction, were well versed in flesh magic and body transformation, possessing more or less formidable physiques. Working in tandem with shapeshifters, also renowned for their body transformation, would be crucial for successfully completing this perilous exploration. "What? This is just a semi-finished experimental subject." Chris showed an expression of disbelief and said hesitantly, "According to your theoretical concept, we have tried and tested many times. Injecting the added air into the airbag through the magic power core, it can indeed make the airship float into the sky." Harvey smiled and shook his head, and explained softly, "So you still think it is the power of magic that makes it fly into the sky?" "Right." Benoit was stunned. "Besides magic, what else can make inanimate objects fly into the sky? It can't be the divine art of the church." Harvey opened his mouth and wanted to subconsciously blurt out the word science, but found that in this strange world full of supernatural and magical power, this purely combined word that he needed to create, part of the word actually also describes the power of magic. Indeed, without the constant hitting of the magic core, the airship's airbags couldn't maintain aloft for long. However, extracting a gaseous fuel like hydrogen and compressing it into a tank to inflate the airship would be far more effective than relying on a magic core that constantly needs to be activated to continuously heat the airbags. Harvey considered himself a complete pragmatist. When magic was more effective than science, he naturally chose magic without hesitation, but when science proved superior, he decisively switched to science. The technique of electrolyzing water to produce hydrogen was considered an introductory junior high chemistry experiment. Even a mediocre liberal arts student like Harvey could explain the principles and practical application with ease. Given chosen talents like Chris and Benoit, they would naturally be no problem either. It's just that, aside from the chief alchemist, they weren't interested in the strange new title of chemist. A week later, at the flight test site at Nampo Base, the newly refilled airship was ready for operation. The modified airship's cabin remained spindle-shaped, with a maximum diameter of approximately 8 meters. Lightweight steel bars served as supports within, connecting 6 independent airbags. The only difference was that the exterior skin had been coated with a dye from the illusion fruit, creating a natural optical camouflage effect. Upon liftoff, it quickly blended with the colors of the sky and clouds, minimizing the likelihood of detection by dangerous creatures and hostile targets. "It looks similar to the last test flight." Duncan carefully examined the modified airship. "This is the final product, a flying vehicle that can be used without the help of a magic power core." Harvey cleared his throat and began to explain to the people in charge of the northward exploration, the airbag no longer needs to be continuously infused with hot air by the power core. Instead, it is filled with a brand new alchemical gas at one time. As long as the airbag is not damaged or leaking, this gas can allow you to maintain a long flight time. After the alchemical gas is exhausted, you only need to use the spare gas tank you carry to refill it with gas, and you can take off and fly again. Chris also interrupted at the right time to supplement Harvey's explanation. The Eye of Illusion and the 3 necromancers marveled at this, saying, "This alchemical gas must be extremely rare and expensive, right?" it can actually replace a magic core. The city lord has spent a fortune on our exploration. Benoit and Chris exchanged a glance, coughed awkwardly, and muttered, "Oh, electromagnetic magic acting on water, acid and metal displacing hydrogen." Chris, who was standing nearby, was startled when he heard his whispers. He then subconsciously looked at Harvey, silently saying, "Elements be upon you." The city lord has obtained extraordinary knowledge from ancient memory fragments that is even older and more secretive than the alchemical school, and is willing to selflessly share it with Benoit and me, two independent alchemists. This is truly, glancing down at Benoit's pale fingers clenching his sleeves, Chris couldn't help but sigh and feel fortunate again. At the beginning, following the instructions and advice of his two mentors and coming to the northern wilderness to follow Lord Harvey was indeed the wisest choice and decision he had made in his life. Perhaps in the near future, he would have the opportunity to touch the ultimate of the alchemy school faster and earlier than his two mentors. Of course, Benoit, who also came from an independent alchemist background, joined Lord Harvey later. Naturally, he has now become his only partner and biggest competitor. Chapter 417 Eastern Investigation. A massive airship descended into the Eastern Basin's Pioneer Base, drawing the busy workers to a halt, stunned to gaze at the slowly descending craft. Harvey was the first to descend from the airship's pod. Following him, Eye of Illusion felt unsteady, and the three other necromancers experiencing a test flight also stumbled. Michel, pale and unable to contain himself, retched painfully several times before apologizing to Harvey. "Lord, I'm truly sorry. I've never experienced flying before. I didn't expect it to be so uncomfortable." Eye of Illusion quickly replied, "I don't know why. I fly perfectly fine using my own magic, but on this magically free airship, I feel dizzy. Could it be that Mr. Michel and I are just spellcasters born unsuited to flying?" Harvey couldn't help but laugh. He'd heard of people with a special constitution that doesn't get car sickness even when driving, and can't be cured with medication or treatment, relying solely on forcing themselves to adapt. "I heard there's a saline alkali land discovered in the southwest of the basin, near the mountains, with large swathes of saltwater red growing there," Harvey asked with interest, summoning the city officials temporarily stationed at the Eastern Expansion Base. While this was a test flight of the airship, his primary purpose was to inspect the development work at the pioneering base. The northern wastelands are rich in copper and iron ore, and Spark City initially relied on mining as its mainstay. However, subsistence industries like salt and sugar were always weak, forcing Harvey to rely on numerous southern chambers of commerce to import sea salt and sugar from the distant southern coast, a heavy burden on the city's finances. Although saltwater reed, a unique salt-producing crop, was later discovered as a northern specialty, large-scale salt production was slow because the fertile land was mostly used for food production. Therefore, the fortunate discovery of a large salt deposit in the Eastern Basin was truly a pleasant surprise. "My lord city lord, the area of that saline alkali land is even larger than the green water swamp next to Spark City." The official in charge of surveying mineral resources at the city hall was also delighted. "We first arranged for workers to cooperate with the alchemy beast to concentrate on harvesting the saltwater reeds that grow naturally in the saline alkali land, and send them to the Dongchuo base for on-site processing. What about the salt mines? How will they be mined later? What about the quality?" Harvey didn't know much about the salt-making industry of this era. He used the common sense he had preconceived in his previous life to judge, and subconsciously believed that the quality of sea salt was better than that of mined salt. A salt worker who had previously served the nobles in Grizzly territory stepped forward and said, "Your Excellency, in Grizzly territory, we used to drill salt wells to extract brine. The salt production method was slightly different from the coastal areas, primarily relying on boiling. Unlike the coastal areas of the south, the northern territories lacked a constant sea breeze and scorching sun, making it impossible to produce large quantities of sea salt using the solar salting method. The salt wells in Frost Flower Town and Mill Town in Grizzly territory barely produced enough salt to supply the entire border region, not even enough to sell outside. No wonder the market price of salt in the Central Kingdoms remains high," Harvey sighed, stroking his chin. The salt worker sighed and whispered to a city lord, complaining, "It's incredibly difficult to get salt out of the deep well by hand. The well opening is small, and there's no way to put a bucket down to hold it directly. Every time we collect brine, we have to first pour a large amount of hot water into the well. Once the brine has dissolved into the water, We scoop it up bit by bit using a specially made copper tube with a pointed bottom. Harvey ordered his attendants to bring pen and paper, and instructed the salt worker to draw a simple diagram of the salt well and the tools for removing the salt. After taking a look, he wondered, "Why do you have to make the well opening so small? Can't you just widen it and dig it wider?" The salt worker smiled and said, "City Lord, the salt layer is deeper than the metal ore layer. If we were to dig like a well, the well wall would collapse after digging halfway. But now things are much easier. With your magic-powered machine, we can use copper pipes to continuously extract brine directly from the salt well. With 2 pipes running in and out, the production efficiency is incomparable, so that's how it is." The method of collecting well salt by injecting water into the brine seems to be a forced method adopted in this era due to technological limitations. However, it is an effective and empirical method. Now that magic-powered machinery can significantly increase collection efficiency, there's no need for any major technological innovation. If sufficient salt production could be obtained from the Eastern Basin, it would not only provide Spark City with much-needed high-quality salt, but would also greatly alleviate the financial pressure on City Hall to import sea salt from the southern coast. When it comes to basic necessities of life, Harvey absolutely refuses to pass on the cost to the people. Stable prices for grain, salt, and sugar are the bottom line. I see. Now let's talk about sugar production. The cultivation of sugarcane in the south and the grinding of grain to make maltose in the north are completely consistent with the world Harvey lived in his previous life. However, the fact that sugarcane cannot be grown in the cold north is also an unchangeable fact. Even Egno, a half-elf expert in plant modification and seed enchantment, expressed his helplessness. Completely altering the growth habits of crops is not something a mortal spellcaster could easily accomplish. It would likely require the power of a deity. Fortunately, the vast, bountiful expanse of the northern wastes always offers Harvey special surprises at crucial moments. Harvey was truly astonished when he saw the pioneering officials excitedly wheeling a wooden cart, carrying a massive plant fruit the size of a wash basin to him. A melon. He patted the massive, still muddy fruit, realizing it didn't feel like a melon or fruit. Not a fruit. Lord, this is something dug out of the ground, like a cassava tuber. The official retrieved a small knife and, in front of everyone, plunged it into the tuber. After stirring it around and pulling it out, a thick, yellowish juice, like honey, immediately gurgled from the damaged tuber. Before Harvey could reach out his hand, Captain Tommy took out 2 fingers, dipped them in the thick juice, and quickly put them into his mouth to suck. So sweet. But not as sweet as honey. In the northern part of the southern border where sugarcane cannot be grown for sugar production, honey is a rare and scarce commodity that only aristocratic families can afford. Ordinary civilians have no such luck. The pioneering official said quickly, but it's better than honey in terms of production. This thing is the rhizome of a woody plant in the middle of the basin. The reserves are as much as an endless forest. Harvey clapped his hands and smiled with satisfaction. Then call it a sugar tree. Saltwater reeds like sugarcane, trees with rhizomes that can be used to extract sugar. The northern wasteland really brings us unexpected surprises everywhere. Chapter 418, The Journey North. After inspecting the salt alkali mines and sugar forests in the eastern basin, Harvey led the group back to Spark City by airship, arriving at the castle near midnight. After a simple dinner, he entered his study, eagerly fetching pen and paper, and began to plan resource development for the eastern basin. Spark City's expansion plans wouldn't begin until late summer. Besides meeting the military factory's ongoing strategic material reserves, the energy department could fully allocate surplus energy to the eastern expansion base. The primary need was to provide energy from magic-powered machines and alchemical beasts. Whether it was mining, transportation, or water pumping and irrigation, magic-powered machines were far more efficient than pure human labor. Once the spring planting season at the eastern expansion base was complete, the first priority would be to construct large-scale salt and sugar factories on the site to get these 2 livelihood projects up and running. Besides, the exploration team led by Duncan and others would depart in a few days. To ensure safety and minimize the risk of their long journey, Harvey had painstakingly considered every detail. If it weren't for the airship's limited payload, I'd actually prefer you take my puppet body with you so I could personally fly with you into the depths of the wasteland and see what the legendary center of the continent truly is like. Harvey sighed to Duncan as he watched Chris and the others make final preparations for the exploration team's departure. As Dallin and the others finally dispelled his adventurous impulse and quickly changed the subject, saying, "My lord, Although the soul puppet only takes up the weight of one person, the mobile box needed to amplify the mental connection is not light. Lord Duncan and his men's first stop this time is to find the kingdom of eternal night, where I was born. Compared to you, I would rather go back to my hometown. Harvey couldn't go, so as Dallin had no chance at all. After all, his alchemical body made of pure metal weighed 300 or 400 pounds. With its carrying space, it would be better to equip the exploration team with more fuel cylinders and liquid magic power, or even bring more magic weapons and food supplies. After repeated testing of the airship's fuel consumption and drawing upon Arsterlin's distant memories, the alchemy laboratory, responsible for the logistics of this exploration, conducted rigorous calculations and ultimately estimated the approximate distance of the first stage. Maintaining a constant speed to minimize energy consumption, the airship would need to travel approximately 300 miles per day, flying day and descending night, taking nearly a month to cross the vast distance to the kingdom of eternal night deep within the icy plains. Once they reached the depths of the icy plains, regardless of whether they found the ruins of the ancient wizarding kingdom, long lost in history, they would have to find a safe area to establish an exploration outpost before their fuel ran out. Using their supplies, they would construct a temporary magic network teleportation array to ensure a steady flow of fuel and supplies from Spark City. This was a source of constant concern for Harvey. This immense transmission distance was comparable to the distance that the members of the Eastern Golden Forest's Elven Forum had to travel to deliver a single trading material to the Evil Moon Mountains west of the southern border. This ultra-long-distance magic network teleportation had already been personally verified by Harvey and many Forum members. Due to the abnormal fluctuations in the magic network's energy, the delivery loss rate was quite high, so it was better to transfer in the central southern border to ensure that nothing could go wrong. However, there was no way to set up a transfer station for the exploration team in the wasteland, and the materials they brought with them were only enough for a temporary teleportation array. If any mistakes were made, they would have to walk across the vast wasteland and risk their lives by crossing the evil orc tribes to return to Spark City safely. It's a shame our alchemy school's research on space magic is still too superficial, Chris said worriedly. If only we could create a magic storage ring with a larger storage capacity. Why would we have to fiddle with calculating airship loads and material ratios? Space magic has always been a niche area of research reserved for alchemists. Whether it's a necromancer like Harvey, who focuses on soul and flesh, an elementalist who excels at manipulating the four fundamental elements, or an arcane mages who specialize in harnessing pure magical energy, none of them have ever touched this remote field involving the expression of magical runes and the delineation of spatial laws. High-level spellcasters with their own wealth, like the Eye of Illusion, often spend a fortune custom making a storage ring from an alchemist, but its function is merely to conceal and safely store rare spell materials and artifacts. Even a top-tier magic ring crafted by a chief alchemist like Mr. Mirror Man can only create a storage space equivalent to a briefcase. In Chris's words, it barely holds 50 cans of food, barely enough for a month's worth of rations. Despite this insignificance, Harvey spent a fortune and used connections to purchase several storage rings from the Alchemy Exploration Society and the Union. These were distributed to the remaining members of the exploration team, Blake, White, and Michelle, who, with the exception of Duncan, the Eye of Illusion, and the Astrologer, lacked storage rings. The three necromancers, who had always faced harsh conditions and limited resources, naturally reveled in the treasures, viewing them as an advance reward from Harvey for their enthusiastic participation in this venture. Benoit, who had also lost the opportunity to explore with his teacher and classmates, led the alchemy apprentices on the airship, inspecting and adjusting it thoroughly, striving to ensure that the new aircraft would not malfunction during the long journey. Spare airbags, fuel tanks, camouflage coatings, magical weapons, he kept muttering to himself as he flipped through the list of supplies. Think again if there is anything missing. Even the alchemy apprentice couldn't help but whispered, "Teacher, we have checked the list of equipment and supplies listed by you and Mr. Chris over and over again. Even the canned food used as rations are matched according to your daily tastes. There will be no problems." Harvey chuckled, patted the alchemist on the shoulder, and teased, "2 magic brain instruments. These are important supplies that must be brought. The exploration team must send communication signals to Spark City within the agreed time period every day to report the day's exploration situation and intelligence gains, and also to indicate that your current situation is safe. Spark City will also arrange for special personnel to be on duty day and night in front of the one-way communication magic brain instrument. Once an emergency distress signal is received, the second airship will immediately take off and carry out a rescue operation all the way north according to the specific coordinates returned by the instrument. After all, the people on board this airship are what Harvey considers to be high-tech magical talents. Whether it is their spirit of exploration or their own abilities, they will never be easily abandoned. Even if the exploration team is temporarily trapped in the depths of the wilderness due to some accident and cannot return, or the magic network teleportation array is indeed unable to transmit fuel and supplies due to the long distance, Harvey has a way to use ground troops to advance quickly and use manpower and alchemical vehicles to bring them back home. The usually taciturn lady astrologer smiled and said, "My lord, there is no need to worry too much. Leave the star field and map mapping along the way to me. When we return safely, I will present you with a complete exploration map." If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 419, Deep in the Icefield. The Eye of Illusion raised his hand and threw the empty food cans out of the airship casually. The astrologer frowned slightly and complained softly, "Jin, please don't always throw garbage down from high altitudes, okay?" If it were in the city, I naturally wouldn't do that. But what does it matter in the wilderness? Anyway, it won't hit innocent people. Duncan, sitting cross-legged in the airship cabin, holding a cup of hot tea, patiently advised his always daring student, "I remember telling you in the past that many magical creatures have a strong sense of smell. If you don't want hordes of magical beasts to sneak into the camp when we set up camp at night, it's best not to leave anything with your own scent for them." The necromancer Michelle suddenly realized, Mr. Duncan, no wonder you asked us to burn and bury the garbage left behind every time we leave the overnight camp. Is it because of this reason? Duncan nodded and rolled his eyes at the embarrassed student. Yes, even ordinary hunters without any magic power understand this kind of experience and skills for survival in the wild. After all, in the wilderness, the identities of hunter and prey may switch at any time. The brothers White and Black, who were in charge of piloting the airship, tacitly switched seats and sat down beside Duncan. They respectfully asked, "Sir Duncan, could you please tell us about your experiences taming powerful magical creatures while studying transfiguration?" Since they belonged to different spellcasting factions, and this casual exchange didn't touch upon the esoteric core of magic, it didn't seem presumptuous or rude. Duncan smiled and raised his half-empty teacup. Michelle quickly understood and took the teapot from the portable stove to refill it. "When I chose transfiguration as my major in my youth, I anticipated that this path would be extremely difficult. Compared to elves, human spellcasters inherently lack an affinity for natural elements. This also means that when they construct transfiguration spell models by simulating magical creatures, they have inherent comprehension gaps and cognitive shortcomings. Furthermore, while the elves weren't overtly hostile toward humans, they were exceptionally closed-minded and conservative in their academic circles, completely unwilling to actively exchange and impart magical knowledge. This resulted in the human magical community being at a disadvantage in the development of illusion spellcasting. For spellcasters like Duncan, descended from ancient wizarding families, abandoning their family's long-standing arcane spellcasting traditions meant starting from scratch and learning the art on their own. Back when I was at the Orland Royal School of Magic, I studied with Mr. Franken, who also studied illusion. After successfully advancing to the intermediate level, I joined the Wizard Alliance and went to the demonic battlefield in the Evil Moon Mountains. I gained the experience and tricks for advancing to higher levels through battle." Duncan's rambling words were full of sighs and emotions, which made the Eye of Illusion couldn't help but interrupt. Combat spellcasters have a great chance of breaking through their own ability limitations when experiencing a life and death crisis, and touching the inspiration and key to advancing to higher levels. "This is what you told me in person, teacher, and it has been proven to be effective." He and Melissa naturally followed Duncan's teachings and suggestions, and saw precious opportunities for advancement to higher levels as combat mages. Black and White looked at each other and said in confusion, "We've often heard people say that battle mages are most likely to get promoted in battle, but no one has figured out the source of this saying and rumor." Duncan chuckled and said slowly, "Most of the ancient wizard families with a long history have this saying circulating among them. As for the source, that's a long story. He smiled and raised his alchemical prosthetic limb with a silvery white metallic color, Mr. Asdalin, the chief advisor to the city lord. You are not unfamiliar with him, right? In fact, it is very likely that he and I were from the same ancient wizard family in the past. The Eye of Illusion was stunned for a second and said in disbelief, "What? Why don't we know?" "Teacher, Mr. Asdalin is rumored to be an ancient vampire, half-blood." "Don't be so rude." The astrologer tugged at the corner of his clothes and reminded him in a low voice. As early as the Dragon War, the wizarding family of Arstalin retreated to the north, establishing a wizarding kingdom deep in the wilderness called the Kingdom of Evernight. Among the branches of their family that remained in the south, Duncan's wizarding family may be a descendant of this lineage. Ancient wizards had no distinction between research and combat types. All wizards in the Kingdom of Evernight were, strictly speaking, battle mages, and they must brave direct confrontations with powerful foes, achieving their rank through life or death battles. "I understand." The Eye of Fantasy couldn't help but stand up. "No wonder you took the initiative to take on the task of leading this exploration mission. Teacher, you also want to find the legendary Kingdom of Eternal Night, right? It may be the ancient wizard kingdom established by your family ancestors." Duncan smiled and nodded. "Mr. Asdalin is also very concerned about this. After all, that was his former home. It just so happens that the first stop of this exploration mission is to find the Kingdom of Eternal Night, so it won't be considered as me doing my job in private," the astrologer said worriedly. "But we have been flying north for almost half a month, and except for the vast and boundless wild forests and the occasional evil orc tribes, we haven't seen even a trace of the ruins of the ancient wizard kingdom." As soon as she finished speaking, Michelle, who was responsible for driving and controlling the airship, shouted loudly at the observation window in front of the pod, "What you said is true. Everyone, a large evil orc tribe has been discovered in the valley ahead. Should we fly over directly, or, after launching from Spark City, they track due north almost without deviation, following their original plan?" From the third day after takeoff, they began to spot traces of fell orc tribes. These savage, primitive tribes were as numerous and widespread as rabbits on the desert plains. Tribes of all sizes spread across the icy plains, frequently migrating for grazing and internal strife. Their presence was visible wherever the exploration team went. Most of the time, the exploration team simply ignored them, flying hundreds of meters overhead, avoiding the trouble of landing. The Eye of Illusion also approached the observation window, squinting at the distant valley. After a moment, he pulled out his telescope, desperately checking again. "I'm afraid we really have to land this time." He turned to report to Duncan, "Teacher, the evil orc tribe in the valley ahead seems to be fighting with a group of desert refugees, and they seem to be in a bad situation. The desert refugees are also fellow humans. As human spellcasters, we should lend a helping hand to them, especially when facing alien invasion and massacre." Chapter 420 Refugee Settlement. A demonic orc, brandishing a rusty iron axe and roaring, charged at the refugees. Suddenly, a frost blade fell from the sky, piercing his shoulder and pinning him instantly to the spot. An old man, huddled beside a camel skin tent, clutching a child, awaiting death, trembled as he opened his eyes to see a strange, black-robed young man descend from midair. Wastelander, are you a wizard?" the old man asked in a trembling voice. The Eye of Illusion shook his head subconsciously, then, feeling somewhat correct, nodded quickly. "Have you ever seen a spellcaster, a wizard?" He didn't wait patiently for a response. Having asked, he walked away, speeding towards the dense forest where the fighting was most intense. "This isn't a fell orc tribe at all," the astrologer, having just finished off 2 fell orc warriors, glanced around and noticed something was amiss. "This is a settlement of refugees from the wasteland, but it seems most have left, leaving only a few elderly and frail children. Clearly, these 2 groups are the first to be abandoned in times of famine or danger." The necromancer, Michelle, who had been brought down to the ground early by 2 high-level spellcasters, had just finished his spellcasting and, before the horrified gazes of the surviving refugees, he pulled 4 or 5 bloody fell orc corpses from the ground. "Ms. Astrologer, let's go help Mr. Eye of Illusion." The astrologer put away her crystal ball and said calmly, "Don't worry about him. After casting transfiguration, until his magic power is exhausted and he can release his transformation, he probably won't be able to defeat the remaining evil orcs in this refugee camp." A massive airship soared over the camp, sending most of the invading evil orcs fleeing in panic. Only a few dozen, gripped by greed and hunger, remained, unaware of the situation, and lingered in the refugee camp until the 3 people who disembarked from the airship quickly eliminated them. When the airship slowly and completely landed in the refugee camp, the 3 vanguards who had been tasked with clearing out the remaining evil orcs had just finished fighting. Without a spellcasting priest, the evil orc troops are as vulnerable as a herd of rats, fleeing in all directions. The Eye of Illusion released his werewolf transformation. Although he dismissed these barbarian enemies, his pale face showed that he had consumed a lot of magic power. The surviving refugees in the camp came out from their hiding places in 2s and 3s and gathered at the open space where the airship landed. Led by the old man that the Eye of Illusion had just seen, they knelt on the ground and prayed for something. Don't the people of the wasteland have no faith in gods? The Eye of Illusion frowned. Could it be that missionaries of the Church of Light could really reach here? The leading old man looked up and replied sincerely, Wizard Master, we believe in the god of earth and harvest. The evil orcs and the wastelanders all believe in this ancient god who protects the ice field. Duncan nodded in understanding and explained to his students in a low voice, simple primitive beliefs. Before the Church of Light grew and became powerful, the southern region also had many primitive beliefs in gods, some of which were symbolized by mountains, rivers, lakes and seas, or symbols representing harvest and reproduction. Michelle suddenly understood. And then muttered with some dissatisfaction, it was clearly the spellcaster who saved you, but you turn around and thank the god of earth and harvest who doesn't even exist. It's really, the old man was stunned for a moment, and said hesitantly, it's been a long time since a wizard has come here. I can't help but feel that it was sent by the gods to save us. Duncan looked around and saw that there were fewer than 50 people left in the camp. Indeed, there were only white-haired old men and thin, deformed children. Where did the rest of the camp go? The astrologer asked softly, looking at the group of old, weak, and sick with a look of pity. The old man waved his hand and smiled. South. I heard that in the warmer south, there's a territory established by a human lord who unconditionally accepts and rescues refugees from the wasteland, providing food and shelter. While I'm not sure, we're still trying our luck. It's better than staying here and being abducted or killed by the evil orcs. There's not much prey left around here. Duncan subconsciously exchanged a glance with his 2 students. He hadn't expected the influence of Spark City to reach deep into the wasteland, thousands of miles away. When did the others set out? They left at the beginning of spring, just as the snow melted. The old man paused, then smiled wryly. Thankfully, most of them have left. The old, weak, and sick among us who remain can still barely survive on the nearby wild fruits and cassava roots, but sooner or later, they will perish from hunger and the return of another freezing winter. They'll only survive 3 more springs, summers, and autumns, much like the insects in the wasteland, whose lifespans are only a year. Duncan sighed and instructed the astrologer, record the geographical coordinates and star chart location of this refugee settlement, and report it to Spark City when you contact them tonight. Even if we can't reach them and pick them up, at least we can provide advanced support for these refugees who have come so far. They had no other options. The elderly and weak refugees left behind, however, acted unfazed, constantly thanking them for their help and enthusiastically begging them to stay and rest for the night. The airship's takeoff and landing required considerable energy, and Duncan, planning to rest for the night, had black and white inventory the exploration team's remaining supplies and set up the makeshift camp next to the airship. With some time left before sunset, the refugees, having just survived a life-or-death crisis, seemed to have forgotten the fear they had faced the evil orcs. They emerged from the camp and headed into the dense forest, resuming their daily routine of gathering wild fruits and digging cassava roots. The elder in charge arranged for several sallow-faced, muscular children to bring firewood and animal hides from the camp, eagerly delivering them to the exploration team's airship. Who's the oldest person in the camp? Duncan asked, beckoning a frail child. It's Grandpa Gabe, the one who spoke to you earlier. Duncan nodded, took out a piece of dried wheat cake from his arms and stuffed it into the thin child's hand, and ordered, go and ask him to come over. Old man Gabe sat cross-legged beside the campfire, holding a can of mushroom soup handed to him by the exploration team in his hand. He drank it while recalling, Wizard Master. Although I have never heard of the Kingdom of Eternal Night, when I was a child, I stayed in a settlement further north for a period of time. There was a large tribe of refugees living there for a long time. It was a mountainous area. The old people said that there was a beacon tower on the top of the snow-capped mountain, which needed to be guarded by the refugee tribe for generations, so they never migrated away. Beacon Tower? Duncan's heart skipped a beat when he heard that, and he quickly asked, "What beacon tower? Have you seen it? How long has it been there?" Gabe shook his head, a little embarrassed, and said, "How can the average person easily climb such a tall and steep mountain? Of course, I've never seen one, but I was a child when I lived there, and the beacon tower must have been built at least 100 years ago." The Eye of Illusion asked doubtfully, "Will the evil orcs not attack there?" Gabe let out a long sigh and said cautiously, "Among that refugee tribe, there are wizards like you." Chapter 421, Tribes Beneath the Snow Mountain. At dawn, the exploration team departed the refugee camp, following Elder Gabe's instructions and heading for the snow-capped mountains. The airship operated to minimize fuel consumption, maintaining a constant altitude of just over 100 meters, aided by wind. Around noon, after a brief meal in the airship's pod, the group could already see the outlines of snow-capped mountains in the distance. Duncan speculated that the so-called beacon towers were most likely ancient outposts on the border of the Kingdom of Eternal Night. The large wizard families that migrated there must have established defensive lines to defend against the ferocious orcs and demons that swarmed across the wasteland. As for the human refugees who permanently resided there, they were more likely the remnants of the former Kingdom of Eternal Night. If they could find the elders and leaders of the refugee tribes and question them, they might be able to uncover clues to the location of the Kingdom of Eternal Night's ruins through their oral traditions. "Teacher, are spellcasters from the wastelands any different from us?" the astrologer inquired curiously. "Will our rash approach to them like this provoke hostility?" Duncan chuckled and explained, "Before setting off, I followed a city lord's instructions and spoke with many officials in the city who were refugees from the wastelands. They told me, the rules of the wastelands have always been to accept the strong and exclude the weak. Spellcasters like us are especially warmly welcomed, but to be on the safe side, they decided to land early when they approached the Snow Mountain settlement, hiding the airship outside. Michelle, Black, and White remained behind as a precaution, while only Duncan and his apprentice would enter the settlement to gather information. We must return to the airship by tomorrow afternoon at the latest. If we exceed this time, immediately use this magical brain device to contact Spark City and ask the city lord for help." The astrologer confirmed the details of the operation with the 3 remaining young mages. The Eye of Illusion chuckled, "You're making a fuss. I just don't believe a small refugee settlement could possibly produce high-level spellcasters." "Arrogant young man," Duncan frowned and scolded. "Have you forgotten what Mr. Asdalin told you before we left? Ancient wizards didn't distinguish between combat mages and research mages. And the descendants of these wizards are likely to have inherited their traditions, all of whom are experienced combat spellcasters." The Eye of Illusion then curled its lips and obediently stood behind its teacher. The 3 of them cast a flying spell and sped towards the snowy mountain settlement several miles away. As they expected, as soon as they approached the settlement, the 3 were immediately spotted by refugee sentries hidden in the dense forest. Sharp whistles echoed through the air. Fortunately, they realized the intruders were fellow humans, and the militiamen who gradually surrounded them did not attack. "Please inform the settlement leader. We are spellcasters from the south." Duncan had barely finished speaking when he saw the gates of the camp in the distance swing open. A group of refugees dressed in thick animal skins, surrounded by a figure who looked like their leader, hurried toward them. "Spellcasters from the south," the leader, a sturdy figure with dark hair and a smoky brow, frowned in disbelief. "How is it possible? How did you reach the depths of the wasteland?" An elderly man beside him, dressed in a cotton robe and with thinning, pale hair, waved his hand and said gravely, "Perhaps a descendant of a dragon chaser, a sky mage with a complete sorceress heritage." "What dragon chaser? What is a sky mage?" The Eye of Illusion couldn't help but mutter, realizing that this old man, clearly another of his companions, was talking about something he couldn't understand. The astrologer quickly tugged at his sleeve, silencing him. Duncan placed one hand on his chest and offered the other a traditional wizard's salute. He spoke sincerely, "Regardless of how you arrived here, please believe we harbor no ill intentions. We are simply seeking the remains of the Kingdom of Eternal Night, destroyed by the demonic invasion centuries ago." The white-haired elder nodded, returning the salute. He spoke more slowly, "Guests from the south, welcome. Please follow us inside." Entering the settlement, Duncan and the other 2 discovered that this permanent refugee camp on the snowy mountain slopes was far larger than they had imagined. Almost the entire valley was occupied, with only a single entrance leading to the outside world. Not only was it easily defended but also difficult to attack. Without aerial observation, the camp's location would have been virtually undetectable from the ground. Unlike other refugee settlements, the refugees who inhabited this area didn't build temporary or semi-permanent dwellings made of animal hide tents. Instead, they had carved numerous earthen caves into the cliff face, apparently able to accommodate at least 1,000 people. The refugee leader and the old wizard led them to the largest earthen cave halfway up the mountain. Chief Shuangzhuang, Elder Wu Li, the refugee leader greeted the three of them and seated them on the animal hide mat before introducing them. The old wizard called Elder Wu Li aside lightly and said, "We haven't had any outside spellcasters visit us for about 10 years. Bermain narrowed his eyes and asked in a rough voice, "How did you find the entrance to the camp? Did you rely on divination?" Duncan smiled and explained, "No. We first visited the refugee settlement in the dense forest valley. Unfortunately, the people there had already migrated south in advance. An old man named Gab who stayed in the valley guided us in the direction of here." Elder Uli was stunned for a long time, then suddenly realized, "Gab? I remember him. God, he is still alive." Having said that, Chief Bermain and Elder Uli finally let down their guard and no longer doubted the identity and origins of Duncan and the other two. "Dear wizard guest, our tribe has lived and multiplied here for hundreds of years. We have indeed never heard of the kingdom of eternal night that you are talking about. There are no ancient ruins around the snow-capped mountains." The Eye of Illusion, who had been full of questions for a long time, finally couldn't help but ask before his teacher, "Then why do you want to live here permanently? And guard the beacon tower on the top of the snow-capped mountain?" Chief Bermain and Elder Uli looked at each other, then each took out a piece of animal skin with torn edges from their arms, pieced them together and spread them out in front of everyone. "Our tribe has weathered numerous invasions by fellow orcs, and much of our ancient heritage and history has been lost. All we have left is this scroll, along with the personal instructions of our leaders and elders, the duty of guarding the Snow Mountain Beacon Tower." Duncan leaned in closer and looked down. He saw that the hide depicted a towering stone tower atop a mountain, but the scene depicted was somewhat strange. The twisted lines above the tower indicated it was ablaze, while below, the group responsible for lighting the tower's beacon fires were mingled with tall, crimson-skinned demons. These mixed figures, humans and demons, all wore expressions of fear and despair, rendered vividly by the crude lines of the mineral pigment. A burning stone tower beacon fire, demons and humans coexisting. Duncan's heart skipped a beat, as if he had glimpsed an ancient secret within the hide scroll. He instantly recalled the historical truth, lost in time, that city Lord Harvey had recounted to them after consuming the magic core. This isn't some remnant of the kingdom of eternal night, but rather a distant outpost left behind by human ancestors migrating from the center of the continent to defend against northern alien enemies. So why are demons even infiltrating this place? Duncan instinctively turned to look at his two students, realizing they had also grasped the implications of the scroll. Their faces paled even more. He decisively said, "Please lead us to the beacon tower atop the snowy mountain." Chapter 422, The Oath of War. Upon learning the exact location of the beacon stone tower atop the snowy mountain, Duncan immediately attempted to fly there with his two students, but was stopped by the refugee elder, Uli. "I know you're all sky mages. Please take me with you to the stone tower," Uli pleaded earnestly. "I can show you the way. I'm old. I can no longer climb the mountain on my own. Let me take one last look." Duncan pondered for a moment, then nodded to the Eye of Illusion and the astrologer. They immediately approached Elder Uli, each offering a hand to lift him up. Then, unleashing their flight spells, they soared toward the snow-capped peaks behind the settlement. Combat spellcasters, completely oblivious to the mana consumption, could often increase their flight speed several times over. Even with a single person aboard, they reached the mountaintop beacon stone tower in less than an hour. The stone tower in front of him was indeed exactly the same as the one depicted on the animal skin scroll. It was built entirely of huge snow-capped mountain rocks, wide at the bottom and narrow at the top. The spiral stairs were not inside the stone tower, but were directly suspended on the outer wall of the tower. If a mortal who could not fly accidentally fell from the stairs, he would probably fall directly off the high cliff and be smashed to pieces. "This tower really has a history of thousands of years," the Eye of Illusion said in disbelief. "So much time has passed, it should have collapsed under the wind and rain, right?" Elder Uli looked a little confused. "Anyway, we don't have the ability to repair it. It seems that it has been like this since it was first built." Duncan nodded, pointing to the spiral stone steps built on the outside of the tower, and guessed, the stairs to climb the stone tower are built on the outside, which is obviously not in line with common sense. I guess there must be a special magic circle set up by ancient wizards inside the stone tower to ensure that this stone tower can remain stable for a long time and withstand the erosion of time. But common protective magic circles require the consumption of magic power to maintain, just like a fire source requires a constant supply of firewood to keep it burning. Once the magic power is exhausted over time and no one replenishes it, the magic circle will naturally lose its effect. But how has the protective formation of the stone tower been able to maintain operation during such a long period of time? The Eye of Illusion showed a curious look, rubbed his hands and couldn't help saying, "Teacher, why don't we break a gap in the base of the tower, and we can go inside the tower to find out?" "No." Elder Uli quickly opened his arms to stop him. "This is the mission that our tribe has guarded and followed for thousands of years. What if there really comes a day when we need to ignite it? To damage it, you might as well kill me first." The Eye of Illusion couldn't help but hold his forehead. The magic fluctuations emanating from the old wizard's body were extremely weak, not as strong as those of the students around him in the tribe down the mountain. He was completely a mid-level wizard with weak flesh and blood and exhausted magic power. He still had no combat effectiveness. It was completely possible to restrain him and forcibly break the tower. Duncan shook his head gently at him. "Don't be reckless. This is not an ordinary beacon stone tower. What if the internal magic circle structure is destroyed and it can no longer be ignited?" The astrologer received the teacher's instructions and hurriedly stepped forward to ease the atmosphere. He asked the angry Elder Wooly in a gentle voice, "Elder, when we were at the foot of the mountain, I heard you say you seemed to come here often when you were young. Do you need to guard here all the time, ready to ignite it at any time? How do you ignite it?" Elder Wooly rolled his eyes and snorted, "Humph. Of course there is no need to guard it all the time. Every full moon day, send warriors from the tribe to climb up. They just need to guard it all night and observe whether there are any unusual changes in the sky. Naturally, I came here many times when I was young." He raised his hand and pointed to the beacon platform on top of the tower and explained, "It's called a beacon tower, but it doesn't actually rely on burning wood or kerosene. Instead, it relies on a huge crystal stone on the top of the tower. If you move it at a certain angle, it will refract a bright light that shines across the entire sky." Ahem, of course, I only heard the previous tribal elder's verbal description, and I didn't have the opportunity to see it with my own eyes. This description naturally aroused the curiosity of the three people. They immediately pulled him to the top of the beacon tower, which was less than 30 square meters in size. Sure enough, they saw the huge crystal stone firmly fixed in the stone slot in the center of the tower. The astrologer stepped forward to observe it carefully, then took out a crystal ball magic tool that he never left from his pocket, and exclaimed in amazement, "This is actually a complete meteorite crystal. The secret is above. This is the main material for making the planetarium. The one in my hand was inherited in my family for generations, and it is only the size of a fist." The Eye of Illusion couldn't help but whisper teasingly, "Fortunately, those old guys in your astrologer association didn't see it. Otherwise they would have to snatch it away from these refugees. Those ancient wizards were really extravagant. Just for an observation and warning beacon tower, they used such a rare magic crystal, and such a huge raw stone." Duncan's mind was not on this at all, but he continued to ask Elder Wooly, "You will send your tribesmen to guard the night on the day of the full moon. Tell me about the changes in the strange phenomena in the sky." Seeing that the three people did not show greed for the crystal stone, Elder Wooly nodded with satisfaction, looked up at the sun that had already set at the end of the horizon, and smiled. "Wait a moment, you came by chance. Tonight is the night of the full moon." He tiptoed carefully to look at the bottom of the stone tower, and found that there was indeed a team in the settlement at the foot of the mountain who had light torches in advance and were slowly walking up the mountain. Looking at the foot of the mountain, "It is probably the team sent by Bearmane to guard the night on the mountain." Duncan nodded, and no longer hurried to ask questions about the astronomical phenomena. He called his students to sit cross-legged on the top of the beacon tower where the cold wind was blowing, and just quietly waited for the night to come completely. Shortly after the sun completely dipped below the horizon, a silvery full moon slowly crept up the sky from the western peaks. The temperature atop the snowy mountains dropped ever lower. Elder Wooly, clad in a thick fur robe, grew restless with the cold and was about to urge them to return to the tower's base and find shelter. Look! 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 What's that?" The Eye of Illusion, who had been lingering near the meteorite crystal, suddenly cried out in surprise, raising his hand and pointing upwards. Duncan's head shot up. Aside from the full moon, nothing was amiss in the sky. He was about to frown and rebuke the students for their prank when the astrologer, who had approached the Eye of Illusion, began to tremble slightly. What had they seen through the crystal? Duncan reacted instantly, taking 2 steps towards the crystal. He too was stunned by the shock. Through the crystal, he beheld a vast city looming on the northern horizon. The night sky in the distance was gloomy and dark. Under the shining silver moon, the edges of the clouds reflected mottled light and shadows. The outline of the city was looming in the clouds, as if it was floating in the sky. Chapter 423 Mirage. The city Duncan saw through the orichalcum crystal atop the beacon tower was unlike anything he had ever seen before. The entire city consisted of countless spindle-shaped spires tightly arranged in a row, looking from afar like a massive castle floating upside down in the air. Like the Sky Realm magic tower in the magical city of Alair, the Eye of Illusion muttered to itself, fixated on the city's silhouette floating in the distant sky. The astrologer frowned and said, "No. Sky Realm is just a magic tower, but this is an entire city." Just by looking, it was clear that the city was at least hundreds of feet above the ground. Raising a city so high up in the sky was beyond mortal means, even for legendary spellcasters. This was why Alair was called the City of Miracles, the legendary human spellcaster who inherited the dragon's legacy, the founder of the Union. In a sense, his status transcended the ordinary. Duncan's excitement was so intense that he could barely contain himself. His mind reeled from the legends and stories passed down through his family, as well as the heritage and historical secrets he'd learned from his conversation with Arstalin before setting off. The ancient Alfred and Hernandez families, the wizarding kingdom established deep in the wasteland. That must be the kingdom of eternal night. It must be the remains of a city from the kingdom of eternal night. Duncan couldn't help but pat his 2 students' shoulders, venting his joy and excitement. Elder Woolley came over, frowned and said, "What ruins of eternal night? This is an illusion that appears on the night of the full moon. It's just a mirage that is common in the wasteland." Duncan was stunned. "Mirage?" Elder Woolley smiled proudly and said, "Why? Do you think people in the wasteland have never seen a sea? There is a vast underground ice sea in the permafrost zone further north. Under the ice layer that is tens of meters thick is the surging underground sea. Most of the illusions you see are mirages reflected from the ice layer on the sea surface to the sky." The Eye of Illusion asked in confusion, "Is this the sky phenomenon you should observe at any time?" Woolley shook his head. "This is a common phenomenon. In addition to the huge floating city, sometimes you can see the reflection of ice whales swimming in the sky." The astrologer also found something wrong. According to the description that the teacher had given them along the way, the City of Eternal Night in Mr. Asdalan's words was a magnificent city comparable to the magical city of Alair. It was definitely not like the one before him that was always looming in the dark clouds. "Teacher, do the scenes presented in the mirage actually exist in reality?" the Eye of Illusion whispered. The astrologer answered decisively before Duncan could. "Of course most of them are real. Mirages can't conjure up strange things from other dimensions, unless they were guided by external forces." Before she could finish, the Eye of Illusion shuddered, raised a trembling finger, and pointed at the mirage of the city reflected in the sky through the crystal. With horror, she said, the city's shadow, shows signs of human activity." Duncan hurriedly leaned in to observe, noticing that a large number of tiny, shadowy figures had suddenly appeared in the floating city's shadow, as if emerging from the inverted spindle spires. The kingdom of eternal night had been destroyed for nearly 300 or 400 years. Even if the city mirage before them was a projection of the eternal night ruins, it was impossible for the remnants of the wizard kingdom to still exist within the city. After all, they were simultaneously struck by natural disasters and demonic invasions, devastating the city, making reconstruction impossible. Could it be the demons entrenched in the ruins, or perhaps the fell orcs? The astrologer couldn't help but speculate. Duncan shook his head, pointing at the dark shadows circling the city and its spires in the mirage, and said gravely, "It can't be the demons. I've never heard of such a large number of demon-ascended masters capable of flight. The barbaric and ignorant fell orcs were even more unlikely." Regardless, continuing their exploration northward was essential. With the guidance and inspiration of this strange city mirage, their hopes of finding the eternal night ruins were greatly increased. "Let's set off immediately." Duncan pondered for a moment and made a decisive decision. The location where the mirage appeared is also due north, which means there must be some unknown connection. He turned to Elder Wu Li and asked, "Your Excellency the Elder, is there a guide in the settlement who is familiar with the conditions in the permafrost area?" Elder Wu Li narrowed his eyes and said slowly, "Several of my students have ventured to the edge of the frozen sea in the permafrost area. The whale bones they retrieved can prove it, but if we leave the snow-capped mountains and go further north, there will be no more settlements for human refugees. You must think carefully." Duncan nodded and said sincerely, "Whether it is us, or you who have been staying in the snow-capped beacon tower for a long time, please believe me, our ultimate goal is the same. There are alien enemies in the north that are more terrifying than the evil orcs and demons. You should have vaguely guessed what this beacon tower is used for." Elder Wu Li sighed. "Needless to say, I understand the gravity of the situation. I never expected those from the southern border to place more importance on this ethereal, ancient legend than we wastelanders. Come with me down the mountain, and select a few suitable guides." The airship, having consumed most of its fuel and supplies, had plenty of cargo space left, enough for Duncan to carry 4 or 5 refugee warriors who had previously reached the frozen sea. 2 of them were Elder Wu Li's students, considered low-level spellcasters who had received the teachings of wasteland wizards. The group spent only one night in the snowy mountain camp before taking off again, under the stunned gaze of the refugee settlement, accelerating northward. Looking back, towering snow-capped mountains rose and fell behind them. The boundless wasteland gave the exploration team a clear understanding of the depths of the wasteland they now traversed, a place rarely visited by humans in the past millennia. The airship continued its daytime flight and nighttime landings, supplementing their rations along the way by hunting common beasts and gathering wild fruits. They trudged north for another week or so. Strange things soon began to happen. Common sense would predict the colder the further north they went, but even after so many days away from the snowy mountains, the surrounding temperatures had unexpectedly risen. When they landed and set up camp at night, the astrologers and the Eye of Illusion even discovered potion plants similar to those found in the warmer regions of the central southern border in the dense forest near their temporary camp. While they appeared to be variants, they proved the temperature anomaly wasn't temporary. "Don't worry, Master Wizard. The elders of our tribe have spoken of underground fires in this area near the frozen sea, heating the land to an unusually warm temperature. If it weren't for the numerous magical beasts constantly migrating here to escape the cold, refugee settlements would have long since settled here," the older refugee hunter who led the group explained to the exploration team as they built a campfire. The Eye of Illusion chuckled, "Then this is a great place to hunt magical creatures and obtain precious spellcasting materials. Magical creatures that live in groups are not to be trifled with. We have an important mission, so don't overthink it." Before the astrologer could finish her words, Duncan, who was sitting across from her, suddenly glared and shouted, "Be careful." A dark shadow approached from the dense forest, shooting towards the astrologer's back with lightning speed. Although the astrologer heard her teacher's warning, she had no time to turn and dodge. This was clearly no ordinary crossbow bolt or some other offensive spell, it was too fast. Like a bullet fired from a magic rifle. Almost as soon as the shadow made contact with the astrologer's back, a dazzling light, like a dense mass of scales, suddenly emerged from her back. The shadow collided violently with the illusory armor formed by the light scales, and disappeared silently like a drop of water in the ocean. The astrologer spat out a mouthful of blood, and the crystal ball in his arms rolled to the ground, breaking into several pieces. Chapter 424 Night Raider. Almost as soon as the astrologer fell to the ground, the Eye of Illusion and Duncan's instantaneous spells flew out, charging straight into the dense forest from which the shadow had struck. Arcane Storm and Mana missiles were incredibly fast and had a small, sweeping effect, making them particularly effective against foes caught in cover. The sound of the spell's impact echoed through the dense forest, shattering trees and sending up clouds of dust. When the dust settled, the expected enemy's true form was nowhere to be seen. A young refugee guide rushed to the astrologer's side, bending down to try to lift her up and drag her into a makeshift tent for shelter. Then, silently, another shadow struck from another direction. In the blink of an eye, it pierced the guide's chest, its force so powerful it sent him flying and pinning him to a thick tree trunk near the campfire. Those gathered around the fire only then saw the weapon the attacker had used, a long, thick, inky black crystal spike. Black and White quickly prepared their spells. With a wave of their hands, each flung a dark green kingfisher from their robe sleeves. The birds circled the exploration team, scattering a thick, impenetrable fog of plague along their path. This plague spell, a specialty of necromancers, was effective in isolating enemies hidden in the shadows. Regardless of which direction the enemy emerged from the dense forest, they would inevitably have to pass through the wall of plague fog. The Eye of Illusion rubbed his hands together and was about to lean down to press down on the ground to cast a force field when three distorted, humanoid figures slowly emerged from the night forest, nearly causing him to forget his spell and freeze in his tracks. The enemies who marched straight through the plague fog and into the camp's firelight were not the demonic ascendants or evil orc priests they had expected, but three strange individuals completely encased in a strange shell, their figures indistinguishable from those of normal humans. The shells, covering their bodies, were pitch black, their surface dull and uneven. It was barely armor, more like a swollen biological skin, tightly enveloping them from head to toe, with only slight bulges and distortions visible at the joints. The strangest thing was the protective helmets on their heads. A single, deep black crystal covered their facial features, and extending to the sides of their ears were two crimson sacs, expanding and contracting rhythmically with their breathing. The strange figure carried a rusty metal cylinder on his back. Two grimy leather tubes extended from it, connecting to their wrists. With a flick of one of their fingers, a stream of extremely thick black liquid spurted out from his wrist. The instant it hit the air, it instantly condensed into a slender, sharp black crystal spike. Using this weapon, they launched a silent, sneak attack from the dense forest. The slender black spike struck the Eye of Illusion, standing in the foreground, but suddenly changed direction the next second, piercing the ground and transforming into a pool of black water. The Eye of Illusion's pupils glowed with a swirling silver white, using force field magic to redirect the crystal spike's impact. Duncan's bones erupted with a violent metallic grinding sound. In just over 10 seconds, he transformed into a massive werewolf, over 3 meters tall. His formerly lushly furred flanks were now adorned with two long metal blades radiating from his back. His lower body was completely replaced by mechanical legs, with knees strangely bent backwards, resembling the toes of a scaly animal. As the wolf-shaped mage charged at the enemy, the Eye of Illusion immediately turned and shouted to the two ordinary guides, "Take the astrologer to the airship pod." Meanwhile, the battle-seasoned shapeshifter had already sent one enemy flying with tremendous force. He twisted his massive mechanical legs, turned, and unleashed the long metal blades beneath his ribs, slicing through the side of another enemy, precisely severing the tube connecting his back cylinder to his wrist. He had discerned the enemy's method for generating the black crystal spikes and intended to sever the source of this silent weapon. Thick black water poured onto the ground. The Eye of Illusion lacked the ability to instantly cast illusions, but his combined expertise in force fields and arcane magic was no small feat. A rapidly spinning, transparent vortex of air swiftly formed from his palm, pulsing with it as rubble rose from the ground around him, whirling like a bullet towards the enemy. Duncan, in the werewolf form, leaped up, landing heavily on a stout tree trunk. He twisted his waist, swung his blade downward, and struck the enemy's neck with a powerful blow, but it failed to sever the head encased in its crystal mask as intended. The sharp blade, forged from enchanted metal and luminous copper, only scratched a shallow dent in the enemy's carapace, as ineffective as a blunt instrument cutting through tough leather. He froze for a moment, then suddenly heard the visionary eye's warning cry, "Teacher, get out of the way." The werewolf mage instinctively ducked, his legs shoving him backward several meters. A dense, rain-like row of tiny black crystal spikes rained down from the sky, piercing the spot where he had just stopped. Duncan peered intently, only to discover that the black pus, which had just been severing the tube and spilling onto the ground, had suddenly levitated, controlled by an enemy, and launched a surprise attack on him. Silently, without a single perceptible magical fluctuation, even its speed was the speed of a bullet fired from a magic rifle. If his allies hadn't warned him beforehand, even his vast combat experience would have been impossible to dodge. Even more chilling was the chill down Duncan's spines. The mottled black fluid that had accidentally splashed onto his body during the battle had transformed into tiny steel needles, piercing his body with a frenzy of life. Unless one's entire body is transformed into a solid, enchanted metal prosthesis, there's no way to resist these bizarre black crystal spikes. The central enemy flicked his wrist, and the black liquid that emanated from it transformed into a long, nimble whip as venomous as a serpent. The Eye of Illusion lifted its palms downward, and the soft earth instantly solidified into a solid stone slab that flew up, blocking the incoming black whip. Dust billowed as the stone slab shattered. The last enemy, who had remained inactive, clutched a spear fashioned from black water in both hands and charged towards the side and rear of the Eye of Illusion, who was desperately manipulating the stone slab. He took 2 steps before stumbling. His head, covered by his crystal mask, instinctively glanced back. He saw the guide, who had been impaled on the tree by the black crystal spikes at the start of the battle, had somehow come back to life. With red eyes and a dead look on his face, he lay on the ground, clutching his legs tightly. The strange man shook his hands, and the black water spear instantly transformed into a sword. He twisted his hand and swung it downward, about to sever the zombie's arms and head. Suddenly, the zombie's skin turned blue and swelled, and with a bang, it exploded. Michelle, hiding nearby, detonated the corpse explosion seed he had planted on the zombie he was controlling. The knife-wielding enemy was sent flying by the explosion, tumbling into the dense forest and disappearing. Michelle, hiding behind the tent, stood up, muttering a spell, and was about to gather his comrades who had been scattered to the ground, covering himself with a layer of flesh and blood armor. Suddenly, a black thorn shot out from the dense forest, piercing his shoulder and piercing into the tent behind him. Michelle, his shoulder instantly pierced, fell backward to the ground, blood gushing from the massive wound. Chapter 425, Eternal Night Ruins, Part 1. The necromancer Michelle spat out a mouthful of blood and lay on the ground, struggling to stand. The brothers Black and White, who had been protecting the airship, rushed over. One of them touched Michelle's shoulder and stuffed a ball of grayish-white flesh into the punctured wound. This was a form of necromancer's flesh magic, causing the surrounding flesh to decay and wither, quickly stopping the heavy bleeding. However, Michelle's injuries clearly affected his lungs, and fine pink blood foam continued to flow from his mouth and nose. Although conscious, he was completely incapacitated. The wolf-like mage Duncan waved his claws to repel the enemy wielding the Blackwater whip, then suddenly raised his head and let out a deafening wolf howl. When the enemy, whose skin he had severed, rushed towards him again with a dense array of crystal spikes, he rushed head-on without hesitation. His blood-red maw opened wide, and a stream of icy white frost erupted from its mouth. As the enemy's rain of crystal spikes pelted the wolf's body, the thick frost completely enveloped its opponent. The smoke and dust cleared, revealing a hideous figure frozen into a humanoid icicle. Its arms were still extended, manipulating the crystal spikes. While it was unclear if it had been frozen to death, it was clear it would likely be unable to thaw out any time soon. Even the crimson sacs behind its ears had ceased to expand and contract like breathing. Duncan, having engaged the enemy head-on, groaned miserably. His body was covered in a dense web of tiny wounds, and the gray fur on his chest was soaked with blood. Only his mechanically modified lower limbs remained intact, not even a scratch from the crystal spikes. The knife-wielding monster, flung into the woods by the corpse explosion, returned to the battlefield. Upon discovering his companion frozen into icicles, he remained silent, allowing his whip-wielding companion to be attacked by the werewolf mage and the Eye of Illusion. He then reassembled his black crystal thorns and charged towards the airship. Only Black and White were now guarding the area. Michelle and the astrologer were severely wounded and unable to fight again. Elder Uli's 2 students were mere beginner spellcasters, having never even studied instantaneous spells. They were no match for the skinned monster. Blake, prepared for this, silently recited the spell in a rapid, swift movement. Suddenly, his muscles swelled, his skin turned pale, his eyes red, and he breathed heavily. He had briefly transformed his body into a living corpse, possessing not only a tremendous increase in strength but also a layer of tough keratin for protection. The zombie-like Black struggled to fend off the knife-wielding enemy. White, cooperating seamlessly with him during the fight, seized the opportunity and struck the enemy squarely in the chest with a single target spell, Withering Frost. Don't be careless. They're nearly immune to magic attacks. Quickly, he and his teacher knocked the whip-wielding monster to the ground. The Eye of Illusion quickly turned and shouted a warning. Before the Eye of Illusion could finish his words, the knife-wielding monster, struck by the spell, merely staggered. Unfazed, he raised his hands, and the long sword, transformed from black water, suddenly transformed into gloves covering his fists. His movements suddenly became incredibly swift and agile. He passed by the zombie Black and pointed toward the airship nearby. A black crystal spike instantly pierced the neck of a refugee guide. The 2 remaining refugee wizards didn't turn and flee, exposing the 2 injured in the airship's pod to the enemy. Despite not having learned instant attack spells, they unsheathed their compact crossbows and rapidly chanted a spell to enchant and amplify their arrows. Two magically shimmering arrows darted out, but the gauntleted figure dodged them with ease, ducking sideways. He kicked one guy back with a single kick, then reached out and crushed the other's neck with a snap. The Eye of Illusion and Duncan rushed over. The werewolf and the zombie black tackled him to the ground, twisting his head, covered in leather and crystal, backward. There was also a crisp snap as his spine broke. It seemed his anatomy was similar to humans. A broken neck would kill him instantly. The zombie black hurried to check on the kicked guide, finding him already dead beside a rock. The kick had shattered his sternum. With bloodshot eyes, Black trudged over to the corpse with heavy steps. His zombie mind, brimming with anger and fury, he reached out with his thick, gray arms and ripped into the crystal visor on the corpse's head. I want to see what these attackers are. Wait. No, Duncan, freshly restored to human form and covered in blood, barely had time to warn before a blinding red light burst from the crack in the crystal visor. Like a turbulent stream of plasma, it twisted and spread, striking Blake with a crackling explosion. A puff of white smoke billowed from his body, and he collapsed to the ground, twitching uncontrollably. Even his already tattered robes began to burn. After the strange red light emanated from the freak visor, the corpse, its neck twisted, finally fell completely still. Even the tough outer covering seemed to collapse and shrivel, as if the interior had been drained away. White roared, about to leap over to check on Blake, but was pulled back by the Eye of Illusion. He shook his head, saying, "He's hopeless. Don't touch him." What if that strange red light? As he spoke, he exchanged glances with his teacher, Duncan. Neither dared to check on the freak lying unconscious near the camp, knocked unconscious, or the frozen humanoid popsicle. Duncan declared decisively, "Start the airship. We're out of here." The three men's attacks and subsequent attempts to reach the airship suggested their intention wasn't simply to kill them, but to observe it. This meant the exploration team had likely been under covert surveillance and following them all the way here, waiting for them to lower the guard once they'd landed and set up camp, only to launch a surprise attack. "Teacher, which direction should we fly?" Duncan pondered for a moment, then said coldly, "North. We can't return the same way. We can't lure these enemies to the Snow Mountain camp, or we'll kill all the refugees in the settlement." Just before boarding the airship, Eye of Illusion and White simultaneously glanced at Blake, lying on the ground, a blackened, charred mess still emitting a faint smoldering cloud. Unable to contain their tears, they dragged him into the pod. Something strange must be strange. Regardless, they couldn't abandon their companion from Spark City in the wilderness thousands of miles away. They had to bring him back. As the airship slowly ascended, the battered team breathed a sigh of relief. Eye of Illusion quickly examined the comatose astrologer and discovered that she had sustained internal injuries caused by the turbulent magical currents that disrupted her meridians when her natal magical instrument activated its protective shield. She only needed to take the recovery potion she had brought with her and rest for a few days to recover. Duncan and Michelle's external injuries were more problematic. The airship couldn't bring the hospital's alchemical healers. The healing potion Agno had prepared was effective at stopping bleeding, but the wounds weren't healing well. Duncan's flesh was pierced by those strange black crystal spikes. Luckily, they didn't seem to penetrate completely. After the operator lost control, the spikes immediately dissolved into black droplets, mingling with blood and flowing out. Duncan, his skinny, naked torso exposed, allowed Vision Eye and White to apply medicine to his numerous wounds. He smiled wryly. "If I'd known this, I should have had Sir Harvey replace my entire body with alchemical prosthetics. That way, at least during the battle just now, those damn things wouldn't have been so pervasive and disruptive." As he finished speaking, Blake, who had been lying in the corner, a charred, black mess, suddenly sat up and said in a hoarse voice, "Mr. Duncan. I thought so too." End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.